There are things you must know. 120 years ago, this castle was inhabited by a most foul lord and queen. Not content with his dominion and powers, the king formed an alliance with a wizard, an entity whose evil matched the king's own. Together, they sought to rule all the evil planes. In a great magical war, they vanquished a mighty demonic archdeity. In its last plea for life, the fiend told them of a magical pen of great power. Words scripted with its point were written into the cosmic fabric and became true. This mighty instrument of the gods is known as the Cosmic Forge. The pair stole the pen and used it to write horrors into the universe never before imagined. The king and his wizard then turned on each other in one last climactic battle for the fate of the cosmic pen. That was the last heard from them. The castle has stood vacant. The fate of the wizard, the king, or his queen, unknown. But now that you are here, that is about to change. What if I were to tell you about a video game with an intricate world, interconnected by shortcuts you gradually unlock over time? Maybe this game has a combat system where you can strike each separate limb, each protected by a separate armor piece. And what if this game's skills gradually improve over time by use, rather than purely mathematical additions on level up? Is the level design from Metroid, or maybe one of the infamous Souls series? Could the combat be from the Fallout games? Is the skill system from the Elder Scrolls? Well, no. The game I'm talking about preceded most of them by many years, yet provided the first tentative steps in that direction. And that game is Wizardry 6, Bane of the Cosmic Forge. In 1990, the Wizardry series was 9 years old, and it was getting stale. Graphically, it was still trapped in the ugly wireframe style from the earliest computers. Wizardry 5, Heart of the Maelstrom, was released in 1988, a full 2 years after it was completed. Gameplay hadn't really evolved either, especially compared to the quantum leap in style and substance the Ultima series had undergone in the same time frame. Next to even newer properties like the Bard's Tale and the Gold Box games, Wizardry was dangerously close to becoming left in the dust of the Paleolithic age of CRPGs. But luckily for us, the co-designer of Wizardry 5 was ready to drastically evolve Wizardry into a more refined and exciting form, one that stands the test of time to still be an amazing experience today. While the first 5 Wizardry games are still really fun, it's Wizardry 6 that changed everything, and feels more like a modern game's sensibilities, even 30 years later. The designer with that foresight to push Wizardry into a new age is one of the lesser-known legends of gaming, David W. Bradley. It's impossible to overestimate Bradley's skill and the mark he left on video games. He is an expert programmer, producer, writer, and designer all in one. Bradley's mastery of addictive combat and satisfying character growth is only matched by his dungeon master ability to cast a spell with snippets of flavor text. Storytelling and world-building in gaming is not just about writing characters with complex motives or interactions between characters, like in a well-scripted play or movie. Setting is just as important, if not more so, in drawing a player into the landscape, so we naturally become a part of it. We're not just observers of a scene, we have to climb up on the stage ourselves to decide the fate and destiny of ourselves in an alien world. Add a dusting of mythic tragedy and philosophy, and a difficult-to-penetrate mystery about the character's motives, and you have Bradley's recipe for an enlightening, engaging masterpiece of a video game. We step through the gate to the castle, and the stage is set with a few perfect words. You are in the entrance chamber of the castle. It appears to be empty, and a heavy coat of dust covers the floor. Small, scampering noises echo down far distant corridors, a reminder that it is you who are the intruder here. Whatever our reasons for entering, we have kicked down the door into a legend, rather than reacting to great events thrust upon us. Rather than a lack of detail, I see it as a blank canvas to write on with internal role-playing. Why are we risking our lives in this cursed castle? How did we meet, and why do we trust each other with our lives? The intro also establishes a massive break with the past. Prior wizardries, and most RPGs for that matter, have a quiet safe area we escape to for rest and resupply before returning to the dungeon. Bradley completely excised any calm or peace from the formula. The immersion is never broken in Bane of the Cosmic Forge. Once you enter that gate, the party is under threat until the very last moment. All resting is done on the fly, and any random attacks while sleeping can devastate an unprepared party of half-awake adventurers. Anxiety is always hovering around 100, because there is no safety from the vile denizens of the dungeon. You can almost smell the musty, dusty corridors, or hear the scurrying of unknown things scuttling away from you. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we have to create a party. The original Wizardry races followed the Tolkien-esque standards of the time. They were human, elf, dwarf, gnome, and hobbit, and they're all still here. In a time where D&D and its derivatives in the Gold Box games were strict about inhuman races, Bane added 6 new species to expand the party horizons beyond the Lord of the Rings. And this was over a decade before Morrowind standardized furry or reptilian creatures as starting races. Monstrous species always add a dash of welcome spice to the tired mix of Gimlis and Frodos. It may seem like a meager cosmetic shift, reflected only in tiny low-res portraits, but that's a puddle-deep view showing you aren't really able to let your imagination wander. With your character sheet for D&D, you don't have any image at all. No graphic representation whatsoever, except maybe if you choose to play with a tiny figurine on a map. Growling lizard creatures fighting alongside samurai catmen, while a pixie whizzes around their heads incinerating foes with a nuclear blast, is a great way to exercise the brain. In fact, it's even more taxing than reading a novel or a D&D adventure module, because they at least provide you with more lengthy, and more importantly, continual descriptions. Here you have to work your mind all the time to provide a running narrative behind the battles and adventures. An early video game like this provides just enough of a chemical catalyst to set off the chain reaction in your brain. It's a massive canvas to write on, and every species is a new tool for your crafting arsenal to make your own plot without massive walls of text and codex entries. No matter how well written they are, you the player are taken out of the equation. A great DM, and D.W. Bradley is one of the greatest dungeon masters or game masters of all, knows that it's his responsibility to provide the player with a finely crafted tableau, and then the player can write his own story on it. He's not leading them by the nose to show off his epic writing skills, and they are pretty epic. Race affects a character's starting stats and resistances to various magic effects, and can limit your weapon or armor choices. With the exception of the fairy, which we'll soon discuss, race is not absolutely vital. Almost any race can be any class more or less effectively. The pluses and minuses are usually just faint pushes, positive or negative, not crushing disabilities and epic bonuses. Again, somewhat resembling a primitive form of the later standard Souls-like system, where starting races and classes are only suggestions in a direction, not all-consuming paths to follow. Starting off the new races is the Rawolf, a canine humanoid. Strangely, they're great at being priests. Maybe because dogs are very loyal or something? Or maybe they just needed a specialization. I typically don't use them, to be honest, because I'm more of a cat person. But the Rawolf are tough and make good melee fighters, or unusually sturdy priests. But I would never use them as arcane magic specialists. They did kind of get the short end of the stick when it comes to resistances because they're only resistant to cold. And there are some cold spells you get hit with in the game, but it seems to be a little less common a spell type than fire or even acid, and less deadly than psionics. Dogs seem a bit too gruff and straightforward for the subtle arts of thievery, but maybe that's just my cat-loving prejudice showing. They're not a bad class at all though, especially for toughness and very canine-friendly support roles. My all-time favorite new race is the Felper. Anyone familiar with the Elder Scrolls games will recognize the precursor of the Khajiit in this feline humanoid. I don't know if this is the first playable cat person in an RPG, and if you know which one is, please tell me in the comments, because I'd really like to know. But it's definitely an early one. Felper have a natural low armor class and even resistance to missiles and magic. yet they pay for it with pretty low strength and vitality. Their cat-like reflexes gives them high dexterity and speed, making for excellent samurai and ninja. I almost always have a Felper in the party, not just because I love cats, but because of their deadliness in those classes, that specialize in critical strikes. Their high speed often allows them to strike first, and they could get an instant kill with that, so that can be game-changing in the middle of a battle. As always, the best kitty cat friends are the ones that will decapitate someone in a single strike if they look at them funny. These fuzzy boys were built for the samurai class. The default cat face in Wizardry 7 is even wearing a Japanese flag headband. I love everything about them, even though they're probably not really good in the tankier roles like Lord or Valkyrie. You should just keep them in the mid-range, front-line people like the ninja and samurai. I think D.W. Bradley must really enjoy Catboys because there actually is a cat humanoid in his later first-person shooter game, Cybermage Darklight Awakening, so he must have a fondness for this kind of character, and I'm glad he pioneered this in video games. The Mook are giant Yeti or Sasquatch creatures. I tend to think of these cheerful Bigfoots, big feet, as good hulking fighters, especially with their high magic resistance to shrug off dangerous spells early on. But really they're just as good in hybrid roles like the Ranger. Their dexterity and speed are unideal for the samurai, ninja, rogue classes. I think the race was really more fleshed out in Wizardry 8 as a psionic species, but they still can make decent casters as long as it's not a priest. For some reason, Mooks have super low piety. I like to headcanon that to me the mighty Mook race stands in defiance of the gods themselves, who were then cursed with a hideous Sasquatchian visage in return. In general, an okay class, but not really something I'd go with thiefy boys type stuff. I'd save that for the Hobbit, the Gnome, the Felper. And there's definitely stronger things to go like the Dwarf with his natural physical resistance for a frontline guy, but the Mook are still pretty good. There are two reptilian races, the Lizardman and the Drakon. Lizardmen have pathetic piety and intelligence, limiting them to more physical classes. They also have a penalty to mana regeneration. That is a huge burden to carry for any spellcasting class, even a hybrid. And hybrid spellcasters have a naturally lower spell regeneration rate than pure casters, so you have to keep that in mind when playing. Only in Wizardry 8 is a pure fighter going to be useful anyway, so it's a little bit questionable whether you'd want to go with a Lizardman over maybe a Drakon. The Lizardmen do have some good starting magic resistance, but they're not a great choice overall for anything but a tank, and maybe with the right dice rolls, a support-focused Lord or Valkyrie who's going to do spells in between combat, so as not to overtax another healer. Again, perfectly viable, but you might be better off if you're min-maxing with other stuff. Drakons have more intelligence and dex than Lizardmen, pushing them into being surprisingly well-rounded, even as tough classes to roll like ninjas. They have a unique racial trait to breathe acid in exchange for stamina. This substitute AoE attack is very helpful for the first hour or 3 of playing, but more or less useless later on, because the damage doesn't keep up with the monster health. Both Lizardmen and Drakon have a natural resistance to mental magic, which comes in handy in the very late game when creatures start using Psionic Blast and Mind Flay. Drakon can be almost any class, with some bias maybe in favor of melee and spellcasters over the hybrid classes, like the Samurai, but really they're probably pretty good at almost anything. Finally, the Fairy is a tiny pixie or sprite creature that excels at magic. I like to picture them like Puck from the Berserk manga. It's somewhat strange to picture, but fairies actually make great ninjas, because they already cannot wear most armor and have a naturally low armor class. Fairies cannot use most normal-sized weapons, but monks and ninjas can fight with their bare hands just as skillfully. The low natural AC of the fairy combines with that of the ninja, so they're very hard to hit physically. I can't imagine a fairy working as any kind of warrior class because of their pitiful health. On a recent run, my fairy mage started out with 2 hit points. 2. Now part of that was because they were a mage, but still, it was difficult keeping her alive for the first half of the game or so. But sometimes that did happen in old school D&D. A mage could roll as little as 2 or even 1 hit point. Even if a fairy can be brutally murdered by a strong sneeze, they're going to dominate in a role as any spellcaster, even getting a special boost to mana regeneration rates. Fairies have to be treated with care, and a few reloads will be needed after an unlucky death, but generally if used with the right touch, fairies are an excellent class capable of dishing out huge damage. Classes have been greatly expanded from the original Wizardry series. The first games followed the standard D&D tetrad of melee-based fighter, stealthy thief, supporting priest, and offensive mage. Even this earliest incarnation of Wizardry had 4 elite classes: the fighter priest hybrid, known as a lord, it's a paladin if you play D&D, the fighter mage hybrid called the samurai, the priest mage hybrid called the bishop, and the extra-lethal evil rogue, the ninja. Bradley greatly expanded the potential of the original roles, and invented 6 new classes for more diverse, highly tactical battles that always present interesting options for multiple paths to victory. Half the challenge of an RPG is keeping the player invested, and this class expansion had a greatly magnified impact on the longevity of the game's success. Fighters remain the basic workhorse class of the previous Wizardry entries. Good tanks who can absorb or dish out damage in equal measure. Unfortunately, they have nothing special to bring to the table like the hybrid melee caster classes, so they're of limited usefulness, except as a holding state while you wait to earn the stats needed to transition to a lord or samurai. Technically, you can say he will level up all the weapon skills very fast, so he can switch between a sword, axe, or mace at high level immediately, but weapon skills level much faster in 6 and 7 than in 8, so it's not really that much. Really just clutching at straws here. Best to avoid the fighter unless you plan on not re-rolling for a more advanced party. They're just there with a sword and a board to swing it away at enemies and not do much else. The katana-swinging, spell-slinging samurai class is back and even more overpowered. D.W. Bradley is more than just a little bit obsessed with Japanese culture. He's even lived in Japan for many years, so the class is more fleshed out as a Japanese warrior than before, with more easily available samurai-only armor like kabuto, toseido, etc. Samurai don't have access to the most powerful plate armor, leaving them always a bit behind the fighter, Valkyrie, Lord trio in physical defense, so they tend to be a bit more fragile in the front line, but they make up for that with titanic destructive power. Samurai now have the dreaded Kirajutsu, or critical strike ability. Crits in Wizardry aren't just extra damage, by the way, they instantly kill. The chance to crit is low at first, but by the late game you can basically guarantee at least 1 crit per battle if you're fighting enough enemies. And if you have a bunch of characters all with Kirajutsu, that's a lot of instant death, and by the end of the game you're gonna need it. This is balanced by Kirajutsu being unable to level up during combat like the weapon skills. You can only increase it a few points at a time on level up, and that is going to conflict with spellcasting because it's on the same screen, so you have to spend the same points divided between the two. Samurai also have access to all of the spells of the mage class, up to and including the dreaded Nuclear Blast. It takes them longer to start getting spells, and all hybrids have a slower spell point regeneration than pure casters, but that scarcely matters. The benefits of better armor and physical killing power than a pure caster is all yours if you're willing to grind for it. The samurai feels like a real warrior from the distant east than he ever did in the original 5 games, where he tended to be little better than a hybrid spell sword, with his ability to use a katana basically it. Your weapon and armor choices start slow, but by the end of the game your samurai is guaranteed to have an absolutely legendary sword, comparable to the weapons in the deadliest Chanbara films. Other classes come and go, but I always bring a samurai along. They add spice to the Western RPG aesthetic, are amazingly versatile, with magical and physical damage, and eventually will start insta-killing foes left and right. All around, maybe the best class in terms of pure variety of abilities. Lords are back, except this time bifurcates the Divine Caster Melee hybrid into 2. The Valkyrie is functionally the same as the Lord, it's just Wizardry's version of a paladin. At level 5, they start gaining the mostly support-based priest spells. Your Lord can cast the basic defense and buffs like Armor Plate and Bless, so your priest can save his spell points for more advanced spells. There's no downside to their physical abilities, it's just extra divine magic for healing or curing poison, so a Lord or Valkyrie is always a welcome addition to the party, especially since they can, like the fighter, wear the best heavy armor in the game that grants a massive -14 to armor class. The Valkyrie is honestly a better choice than the Lord, however. In the late game you can find a Valkyrie-only weapon called the Maenad's Lance. It's a devastating weapon with a 10% critical hit chance, letting your Valkyrie get in on insta-killing enemies, like a samurai, monk, or ninja. No comparable item is Lord only, and Lords do not have the auto-regen like they gain in Wizardry 8. It's basically just a role-playing option if you want a Lord or a Valkyrie, a heroic knight of the Round Table, or a mighty warrior maiden from Asgard. Take at least one of these two classes so you can tank physical damage, buff allies, and have extra healing in desperate moments. Rangers are interesting additions with a somewhat spotty implementation. Any Lord of the Rings fan will recognize an Aragorn-like figure, who wears lighter armor, uses a bow, but can mix it up with a sword if need be. The real issue though is how ranged combat works. Bows in Wizardry 6 are a major improvement over prior games, but that isn't saying much. They were never intended in 1 to 5 as any kind of serious damage dealer. Even a high skill in archery will not produce anywhere close to a similar level in a melee skill. And an oddity is that bows do not actually cause damage, so upgrading your weapon only increases the chance to hit. Arrows have damage values, and they are hard to come by. The first merchant you meet will have a reliable supply of basic arrows, but even by mid-game they feel like those arrows are made of cardboard. This wouldn't be much of an issue if more powerful arrows were easier to find, but they aren't. Without knowing exactly where the merchants are located, like someone who's played the game many times does, you can go hours without a restock, or need to trek far, far back to an earlier merchant for pitifully basic arrows. Decent ammunition with higher damage or inflicting status effects, aside from being expensive, is haphazard, and may require grinding against powerful drow archers later in the game to get large quantities of. There are a bunch of interesting arrows of different types, but finding them is the issue. Fighters, Valkyries, and Lords are much better provisioned, and it's just simpler to use them, while Rangers have to be careful about what they expend. Rangers are able to work in either the front or back row, but why put a warrior subclass in the back row just to use arrows? Rangers can also use alchemy magic, which is great, but nothing can compensate for that weakness in physical damage. They end up feeling like middling fighters or weak alchemists, or a waste when they're just firing arrows. This is especially an issue later on when your other fighters are gaining great armor, and the ranger is stuck with leather at best. They can use the Kamel doublet, but they can't even use chainmail things. They can't even use the Jayzraint tunic either. One sword called the Estoc de Olivia is ranger only and really strong, but it's not easy to find. It's not guaranteed like some of the things the Samurai or Valkyrie can use. It is possible to get a really great bow called the Elven Bow late in the game, but like I said, without the ammunition, it's not that valuable. Oh, and by the way, when you're creating a ranger, you pretty much are going to have to choose an elf, because the best bow that I just mentioned, the Elven Bow, it's, as you might expect, elf only. Despite all the negatives, one massive positive is that the Elven Bow is the only decent weapon that can be transferred all the way to Wizardry 8, if you're willing to think that far ahead. Wizardry 7 lets them use somewhat better armor and weapons, but it's not until 8 that they truly shine. All classes are viable, but the Ranger is definitely weaker than the others in the melee category. If only the range combat was as advanced as it became in 8, you would gain a powerful ally. Instead, they tend to be a bit of a drain and a slot better filled by another class. Monks are deadly warriors specializing in hand-to-hand combat, with spells from the psionic school and special quarterstaff weapons rounding out their abilities. Monks can also critically hit. They're able to kill a man with just their bare hands in one strike. That's impressive. Their only drawback is that they cannot wear almost any armor, leaving them very vulnerable to melee attacks. Like the ninja, monks have a very high natural armor class that gets better when they level up, but if they're unlucky enough to be hit, their health is brutally ripped away. The psionic spellbook is my personal favorite and contains deadly mind-affecting spells, letting the monk tear up hordes of weak enemies or viciously beat tougher opponents. Their hands and feet do more damage the higher the skill, but it never really reaches that level that weapons can in the hands of other melee classes. On the flip side though, that means you don't have to worry about buying or grinding out a good weapon. The monk is always armed, with his guns of steel. Monks can also use one of the best weapons in the game, the Zatoichi bow. The bow is a staff weapon, so monks can even use it from the back row if you're worried about them getting hit in melee. Monks are great in the later game, but can be a challenge early on. Their epic critical strike skills only get good after many levels, and if you have him as one of your 3 frontliners, he's in grave danger of repeated deaths in the first 10 hours of gameplay. I would usually recommend monks for something after your first playthrough, but if you're willing to stick with them, monks have an amazingly deadly payoff. Thieves are the least useful class in the game, which is pretty much how they were in Wizardry 1 through 5. They weren't strong enough to remain on the front line, but didn't have decent ranged options in the back. They hung around just to open up trapped chests for treasure. Wizardry 6 has expanded their repertoire though. There are now considerable numbers of throwing knives and magic items like bottle rockets, for them to contribute, barely, from the back row. Thieves can now hide in the shadows during combat, giving them a chance to backstab an enemy, from any row, for double damage. This sounds great, and it can be, but it's very situational. Most of the time these backstabs are not as useful as simply a standard attack, except there's an added penalty for waiting one turn to go into hiding, and then next turn attacking. Increasing the complexity, you may actually fail to hide in shadows, depending on how high your ninjutsu ability is. If you succeed, you have to check every round to see if you're spotted. That means you could, if very lucky, remain in hiding indefinitely, after wasting just one round hiding, but that is very unlikely. Most higher level enemies are barely going to let you hide in the first place. It's a great idea, not the best execution, however. Thieves specialize in disarming traps and unlocking doors. There are now a ton of locked doors, especially early on, so a thief can be very handy. In the late game, some locks are so complex, even the knock spell can't reliably open them, making your roguish companion remove a headache for any other party. Sadly though, even the locks and traps skill, deliciously named Skullduggery here, is barely enough to keep the thief functional. A number of other classes, all with more useful abilities, also gain the locks and traps skill, so why would you bother with going a thief who just has that rather than another class that has locks and traps and a whole bunch of other stuff? Thieves aren't nearly as good with ranged attacks as rangers, have no spells, poor armor, aren't spectacular in melee, and their skills overlap with too many better equipped classes. In general, I would not recommend a thief unless you really want that extra lockpicking skill as a crutch early on. At the very least, you should be planning on transitioning him to a different kind of rogue class like a ninja later on. Ninjas are back, and they're even more overpowered. No, I'm not kidding. It used to be impossible to get a ninja in Wizardry 1, and it's still kinda hard. You might want to try to upgrade that more useless thief into a ninja rather than getting one at the start, but it is possible. One oddity about leveling, by the way, is that for some reason the game auto-fills certain skills when you gain a new level if you don't have the minimum skill requirements that that class should have. This really only comes up though with a ninja, but I thought I would mention it. Mercifully, the irritating alignment system of prior games has been abandoned, so ninjas can fit in with any party at all. Monsters are all hostile, so no worry about accidentally attacking a friendly group, but you can attack and kill any merchant you want. Not that you'd want to, but it's always a nice touch that murder hoboing is an option if you roleplay as a party of deranged lunatics. Ninjas are experts in martial arts combat like monks, but have a couple of other paths to choose. They can wield various daggers, katanas, ninja-only daggers like the Sai, which grants extra critical chance, Eastern staves like the powerful Hayai bow, and have the iconic shurikens for ranged damage. The daggers or shurikens can be dual-wielded, making for the already high base critical chance of the ninja soar up to almost broken levels. With a high enough skill, even Balrogs can be killed with a single slash of a Sai. They can even use some polearms, which seems a bit too powerful and un-ninja-like for me, but one of them is a Naginata, I guess. Ninja are the only class that can use nunchucks, which have a 10% knockout ability, letting you wail on unconscious monsters for extra damage. They still can't wear armor aside from their starting equipment of stereotypical black pajamas, but they have that supernaturally high armor class to compensate. Like monks, they will take quite a bit of damage if struck, but that's if the enemy can hit them in the first place. To top everything off, ninjas now have access to spells. The alchemy skill conflicts with points in Kirajutsu, so you'll probably level up slower, but still the ninja is now beyond overpowered, and pretty much broken if you grind out their magic and weapon abilities. Ninjas are probably the best overall class and highly recommended for any and all playthroughs for locks and traps, hiding in shadows, kirajutsu, alchemy, unique weapons, high natural AC. You just can't go wrong with a ninja. I don't want to say they're required, but I would make sure to have one. Bards occupy a similar jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none role that they held in AD&D. They're a very odd thief-mage hybrid that is a bit better on the front line because of the light armor and semi-decent melee weapons they get, at least compared to the mage, but probably better in the back row for safety in the mid to late game. Bards have the hide in shadows ability and locks and traps, but also access to the mage spellbook. Whether it's a D&D campaign or a video game, diffuse skill choices are great early on and a hindrance by the end, when specialists are vastly stronger in a narrower field than you could ever be. You may also find your skills spread a bit thin, requiring a bit of grinding to keep up with all the choices you have. The hallmark of a true bard is their magical music. Bards have access to a number of magic instruments that mimic casting a spell. Unlike spells, though, they don't consume spell points, letting you cast them over and over again. This sounds great, and it is by Wizardry 8, but in 6 there are only a pitiful handful of instruments to find or buy. You begin with a lute that casts sleep, great at the start and pretty useful even into the mid-game, but the only other instrument for a very long time casts Itching Skin, a spell that disrupts enemy attacks, when it works. Not exactly the best repertoire. Other mediocre instruments are found way later, far too late really, and only cast paltry spells like Bless or Fear. One late-game instrument casts Weaken, not useless but hardly worth the wait. Only very late in the game do you find a truly decent instrument, the Prometheus Horn. It casts Fireball, letting you devastate enemies at will. There are other instruments in the game's files that maybe were slated for inclusion at some point, but they never were. Like an item that can cast the psionic spell Mental Attack. Either because they ran out of time or they're considered too powerful, they're just not in there now. I can understand why the instruments may have been intentionally limited though. You already have those mage spells, and there's no safety valve for abusing the weapons like in Wizardry 8. You can't use an instrument more than 2 or 3 times in that game without a stamina recharge. Instruments can be used endlessly without failure, backfiring or much stamina loss, making them potentially ultra-powerful. The Bard wasn't really fleshed out until Wizardry 8, making them a questionable choice, especially for your first time. I would leave them until you're more experienced and want a unique challenge for your roguish-type character. Priests have been considerably upgraded from their counterparts in the first 5 games. They now have the ability to do some decent damage spells like Blades and Whirlwind. Not that they didn't have any damage spells back then, but it just seems to be a lot more useful this time around. Even with those damage spells, they're still primarily a support-based class. Bless to increase your chance to hit, the all-important Heal Wounds, Cure Poison, Disease, Paralysis, Cure Stone. Like all Wizardry games, you need to worry about negative status effects at least as much, if not more so, than damage. Without the Theology spellbook, you're going to be 6 feet under faster than a ninja with a haste spell, especially since it's the only way to get the Armor Plate spell to increase armor class across the whole party, and Enchanted Blade to increase your chance to hit. But just because you need the spellbook doesn't mean you need the priest. Their hostile spells are decent early on, but they only learn a serious damage spell way later, starting with lightning. They do eventually get the Death Wish spell, which has a chance of killing every single enemy you're facing, which is pretty darn good if you beat an enemy's life force resistance. But it costs a huge amount of SP and is only available way later in the game. They also have the Word of Death spell, which causes enormous damage across every single row. Priests are a bit tankier than mages, but not by much. They're not like the D&D priests that can wear plate armor or anything. And they can't do much of anything in melee. Having someone who can focus exclusively on healing is useful, especially at the start, but if you want to greatly increase your party's killing power, it's better to focus on a hybrid like a Valkyrie or Lord, or the Bishop who gets both mage and priest spells. It's not an ironclad rule or anything, and priests are more versatile than they had been, a big improvement overall, especially because of the huge amount of undead and demonic creatures in Wizardry 6's late game that they could use their anti-undead or anti-demon spells on. It's not a bad class, it's just whether you want to min-max your party's abilities. That's going to be the determining factor of whether you have a priest or not. Mages remain the vital back row artillery, dishing out huge punishment while being protected by sturdy infantry in the front row. Early on, they have the vital spell Sleep that tries to put an entire row of enemies into Dreamland, crucial for early crowd control. It's very handy early on and remains fairly decent even in the mid-game. By then, though, you're going to have spells like Fireball and Magic Missiles, the workhorse blow-em-up-real-good spells. By the late game, they have Deep Freeze, which can easily do 50 or 60 points, or maybe more, of damage to a single opponent, and even harness the power of Atomic Fission to cast a Nuclear Blast, a roaring fireball of heat that will char every enemy you face. They aren't just about attack, though. Mages also have some defense spells you need if you want to survive. The catch-all Elemental Shield spell from Wizardry 8 is divided into two separate spells, Fire Shield and Ice Shield. And if you aren't fast enough casting them when facing demons or other fire-breathing monsters, you'll be burnt to a blackened crisp in seconds. Seriously, anything that seems even remotely like it could breathe flame or throw a fireball, you have to get that Fire Shield up immediately. For some reason or another, Ice Shield isn't really all that important, and I tend to skip it. There are a few monsters that can cast ice spells, but they're rare, and you can probably just avoid them most of the time. Arguably the most important spell, though, that the Mage class has, and only the Mage spellbook, is Magic Screen, which greatly increases your resistance against magic spells. The other pure spellcaster guys, the Psionic and the Alchemist and the Priest, they have a mix of support and damage spells, but they usually have some damage spells to even out what the Mage has, but none of them have Magic Screen, so it may be crucial to either have a Mage or someone with the Mage spellbooks to get that, because against certain enemy spellcasters you're going to be very, very weak without Magic Screen. The mages carry the game at the beginning, when fighters can barely hit an enemy without tripping over their own swords. The mages are like mortar strikes that can blast huge holes into the monster's ranks. Only towards the very end of the game will melee characters, when they get really good weapons, start to equal the mage in damage. Naturally, like any spellcaster, they're going to be very frail, probably the frailest of all of the spellcaster classes, to be honest. But it's, I don't want to say essential to have a mage, but I would say it's essential to have somebody with a mage spellbook. So at least a bishop or a samurai or a bard or someone like that. But yeah, mages are absolutely great, as they always are, and vital for destroying enemies in large numbers. Bishops remain the badass masters of both divine and arcane magic. While they aren't nearly as broken as they are in Wizardry 8, they're still a combined mage-priest, with ultimate versatility on the attack and the defense. This does come with the penalty of very slow leveling, however. Without grinding, a bishop is going to be behind the rest of the party by maybe a level or so, a big issue late in the game. But that is a minor nuisance next to the huge amount of spells available for almost any situation. Some people complain you're going to spend way too much grinding compared to a priest or a mage, but if you want the epic power of a bishop, you have to work for it. Since you're probably going to be fighting a lot of battles anyway in your first time through, I would highly recommend bringing a bishop along for your first playthrough. You always have something to fall back on with the bishop. The Psionic is my favorite class in the trilogy, edging out the samurai just barely. They have all of the spells from the mental magic realm, including unique spells like Mind Stab and Psionic Blast, both of which have a chance of turning an enemy insane or vegified, as they call it. There's just something extra cool about telepathic magical powers that I like better than the standard Gandalf-type wizard. Insane or vegified enemies have a chance of losing their turn, attacking as normal, or best of all, attacking their allies. Psionic Blast can easily turn the tide by sending vicious enemies to kill each other.
We never harm anyone, Mr. Brent. You're going to harm her.
The only downside is that the Psionic does not have a spell that just causes insanity, like in Wizardry 7 and 8. Psionics, like the other new caster class, the Alchemist, are odd mixtures of offensive and defensive magic. Psionics can heal wounds, cure paralysis, and restore sanity to vegified allies. Oddly, they can also cast Bless and even Resurrection, which seems a bit broken, but hey, I'm not complaining. Psionics also have a Summon Allies ability, something they sorely lacked in Wizardry 8. The Illusion spell summons ghostly undead like wraiths. Probably the weakest of all three summon monster abilities, but still very useful. Having access to literally every spell in the Mental Magic School does limit their spells in the other schools. They have nothing at all on fire and only one spell from air. Admittedly, some enemies have very high resistance to mental magic. They do have access to the Earth spell Blades in those occasions to get some damage in, but they might be better as support casters against mental resistant monsters. Fortunately, they can also cast Weaken for extra big and strong creatures like giants, Slow for super fast and ninja type enemies, and Haste to increase the party's initiative. Psionics are sometimes put down as not as effective as mages or alchemists and not having the extra strong support spells and anti-undead/demon spells that priests have. But forcing opponents into indolence or aggression against each other is a mighty skill, useful from the very beginning to the very end of the game. Hordes of enemies will fall madly, striking each other with a psionic, and I highly recommend bringing one along on your first playthrough. Alchemists are semi-druid-like nature spellcasters. They have more elemental damage than the psionic, but mix in some support spells like Cure Poison or Cure Paralysis. Oddly, even though they have Heal Wounds and the other curing spells, alchemists cannot get Resurrect. They seem like they should be better at it than a psionic, but I guess it was done for balance reasons. Some alchemy spells mimic the mage, like Firebomb, it's basically just a fireball, but alchemists have the added benefit of never being silenced because their magic involves chemical reagents rather than saying spell words aloud. This is a big help fighting undead or enemy spellcasters that like to silence your entire party. An early alchemist spell is Blinding Flash, that blinds a group of enemies. It's a lifesaver at the start of the game, but most spells in the game can be backfired, hitting your party instead of the enemies, turning an automatic win by blinding everyone else into an automatic reload because your entire party is blinded and can't do anything. Alchemy also includes some great poison-based spells in the air category. The spell Deadly Poison seems to chew through enemy spell resistance easier than almost any other spell. Later on in the game, I would save it for the most dangerous opponents with high magic resistance, like this Samurai Lord. He was very hard to hit, but with Deadly Poison he started to take quite a bit of damage every round. In fact, several alchemy spells inflict chip damage over time, making them equally good at long, tough boss fights, or large crowds of enemies when you can eventually get the target everyone poison spells. These stronger poison spells infect every enemy you face in all stacks, driving entire swarms of enemies to a slow, toxic death. Alchemy's poison ability is useful on extra tough monsters, they can summon monsters to help the party, and even wear armor that's a bit better than the norm. All around, they're a great choice for a more versatile caster than the standard pure mage. They also have the extremely powerful Asphyxiation spell, which tries to cause instant death on every creature in every stack. It's very, very strong and can save your life when you get hit by swarms of enemies late in the game. Generally, the skill and leveling system are bar none the best of the time period. It was groundbreaking to start encouraging skill level through use, rather than simply arbitrary XP points mathematically added after you killed monsters. It wasn't nearly as fleshed out as it would become in the later Elder Scrolls series, but it did set an important precedent. Wizardry 6 also nails the extremely tricky issue of exactly how fast you should progress. All prior entries in some games up to this day require grinding. The slow, mind-numbing battles that do not aid in progress or treasure, only in making your party strong enough to survive without dying every other second. There are difficulty spikes here and there, but for the most part you won't be worried about repetitive combat getting in the way of discovering new areas, or impeding progression, unless you want to min-max your character by class changing. Even Wizardry 8 did not get this exactly right because of the slowness of leveling up skill points. Your first few levels of any class are going to go through very, very fast, allowing you to get a bunch of quick skill points. So even min-maxing by class changing can go pretty quick, at least compared to other Wizardry games. Almost every skill has an important function that is immediately useful. It wasn't unknown in older games to include such a myriad of classes and skills, that some of them are not just suboptimal, but useless in-game. I'm looking at you, Buck Rogers' Countdown to Doomsday. But almost everything in 6 fills an important function. With the odd exception of Scribe, I would recommend not putting any points into this at all. Using magic scrolls is a major waste of time because they are rare, take up slots in your tiny inventory, and need skill points to have a chance to cast, without fizzling them.
A goose. Fat and ugly.
Aside from that exception, nearly everything else has some sort of use, even if Critical Strike is much more useful than anything else. One irritant about Wizardry 6 continued from prior entries in the series is the severe difficulty in rolling the desired stats for a particular class. Originally, you were intended to transition into the advanced hybrid caster melee classes later on, after starting out with the old D&D basic classes. Unfortunately, unlike Wizardry 8, your stats are leveled up at random, meaning you may spend the whole game unable to get the exact stats you need. You can quit and reload, but because you level automatically after a battle, that means fighting a battle all over again and maybe dying in the process, and you still might not get the stats you want. So it's safest to roll the right classes you want at the start, but it can take hours to roll the desired party. There's even mention of how frustrating this is in the official hint book for Wizardry 6, so it's not like it was unclear how miserable this system is, and yet it's still there. Another oddity you have to pay attention to with Wizardry 6 is how vitality works. Your HP is based on your vitality, but increasing it does not retroactively give you more HP, so starting with a large amount and keeping it high is important. Vitality is ultra important to watch and can only be recharged with a rare item called a Stone of New Life that increases your vitality. If your vitality goes lower than 3, you're permanently dead. No resurrection will work without that stone. I need to be clear though, I'm not mentioning all this to discourage you from the game. I just want to let you know that this game is worth it. All cards on the table. Any headache you go through in character creation is more than made up for with the addictive combat and satisfying class progression. Building the exact party for your playstyle is tactical, engaging, and diverse enough to be fun through a dozen playthroughs. You can stomp enemies with lords, valkyries, and samurai in the front row, or go for a more subtle approach with samurai, ninjas, and monks relying on speed and critical hits. We now have multiple iterations of the damage-dealing spellcaster, with the mixed support offensive spell Alchemist and Psionic. Rogues have been expanded with the Imperfect Bard class and the ability to hide from enemies for devastating backstabs. Or maybe you eschew roguery altogether and just work on pure devastation. Every party has their strengths and weaknesses, pushing you to shift tactics accordingly. What may be a breeze for one party is devastating for another. Crucially, every class has multiple approaches to a fight, like the samurai who can be a modest tank in front, blitz enemies with multiple critical hits, or slay whole stacks of enemies with fireballs. In some RPGs, especially for the time, combat can become a chore, just an obstacle on the way towards progress. But the limitless tactics of a Wizardry 6 party make each fight a thrilling new experience, forcing novel approaches and choices about what skill you want to improve. Should a new powerful weapon you receive determine a class change so it can be used? Should someone be moved up to the front row or kept safe in the back with a pole weapon? Is it better to focus on a pure class or grind out enough experience for an all-hybrid party, with 6 characters all with equal skill at magic and melee? If you're looking for a party recommendation from me for your first playthrough, I would recommend going with a samurai, lord, ninja, psionic, bishop, and mage. But really anything you choose will be viable. And if the party is not working out, you can change classes as soon as you have the requisite stats. Experiment, explore, build the party how you see fit, and change it when you need to for survival, or just to enhance the novelty of your playthrough. Wizardry 6 and beyond has a powerful variations on a theme feeling, with each class being just unique enough to give almost endless enjoyment. But now that we have a party, we will start our adventure in the cobweb-bedecked ruins of an abandoned castle. We begin in my favorite setting of all fiction, ruins, because it's just filled with questions of how this happened and why the people who built it are gone. And there's an unsettling mystery to discover. by pawing through the remains of the castle's former owners. Wizardry 6 front-loads most of its story in this intro area. Instead of puttering around a tavern or going on fetch quests, our party is tossed into the deep end both in combat and the plot. The decayed bedrooms of the king and queen hold secrets. Tension, affairs, incest, illicit activities of all kinds were polluting the royal family long before the king's downfall. The excellent flavor text is almost horror-like in its unsettling, eerie premonition about what we are here to discover. A great stone altar rises up from the floor, graven with runes and demonic figurines. Grotesque caricatures play in some bizarre ritual, and stains of deep red color the surface. Ghoulish acts depict a story of horror, giving cold sobriety to its unholy purpose. These images brutally dispel any ideas of Gaelic charm the castle once held, in innocence consumed by the shocking nightmare of its reality. Don't forget what you've seen here. It's imperative to chew over the mysteries until you decide just what happened. Remembering what you learn here will drastically affect your choices later on in the game. Before the story, though, we have to learn how to not die in every other battle. No easy feat at level 1. Your characters can be killed by a strong sneeze, and combat can be heart-wrenching. Loading and reloading again and again are required, and you have to rest after every battle. The main foes at the start are bats, killer plants, and rats. Our party is so fragile, though, even a rat can prove to be a life-or-death struggle.
This foe is beyond any of
In some surprising continuity with older wizardry, Bane starts your party as pathetic weaklings barely able to survive. But it's not all bad. As soon as you gain even one level, the difficulty eases off considerably. Don't get discouraged. That first level is just the game being rough on you, trying to bully you out of playing it. Don't give in. Wizardry 1 created one of the earliest interpretations of combat in an RPG game, and for the time it was considerably superior to combat in its contemporaries, the Temple of Apshai and Ultima. In fact, speaking of Ultima, the combat in later games like Ultima 7 was either not improved upon or actually worse. That isn't to denigrate those games, I'm only pointing out the simplicity compared to the king of RPG combat, Wizardry. Battles are turn-based and triggered by walking onto a new square, or even just turning, or even just leaving a menu screen. Games were brutal back then, kids. Get used to it. Inputting commands for each character is instantly recognizable to anyone who's played a JRPG, an entire subgenre that owes its ultimate origins to wizardry. Choosing whether to attack, use magic, or an item could go by very quickly in the OG wizardry. This is helpful to race through an unwanted encounter, but lacked some tactical depth. Bradley has expanded your choices, so it requires some thought before fighting. Instead of simply attacking, you now choose what type of attack based on your weapon. Each attack has a special modifier, like thrusting has a -2 to hit, but +2 to penetrate armor. Stopping and thinking what works best for which enemy is necessary, so it's not as easy to skip quickly through the commands. And that's the biggest reason why I love the wizardry system. It has this incredible tactical edge without getting bogged down in the minutiae of an actual tactical RPG, like say Fallout or something. It's quick and addictive, but also makes you think about what you have to do, combining the best of both worlds. The biggest change by far, though, is to the magic system. In previous titles, you had a set number of casts in each spell level. The maximum number was 9 casts per level. When you were out of casts for that level, you were done until you ran back to town to sleep. Spells still have levels up to 7, but they're divided into 6 elements: fire, water, air, earth, mental, and divine. Each element has its own pool of spell points. When you cast a spell, you now choose its level, and thus how many spell points you spend and how powerful the spell is going to be. You're always going to be worried about your spell points. Should I save them for a more difficult encounter later, or do I need to spend all of them just to survive this encounter? It's a remarkable form of survival gameplay. You always have to worry about your resources going down, your resources being spell points here, and how much you have to recoup them over time instead of charging ahead. Running out of spells used to be tedious. You had to break off your explorations and schlep all the way back up to town to rest. Yet it could also be comforting. It added a mechanical, repetitive task where you rested and relaxed before heading back in fully charged in spells and health. But in Wizardry 6, it transformed into a dangerous tactical game. The longer you rest, the more likely you are to provoke an attack. It's a difficult sort of gambling that you go into, asking how long are you willing to rest, knowing that every second that ticks by increases the likelihood of a brutal attack. You're always trapped in the dungeon, and you're always rolling the dice about what you're going to do next. Spell points are restored very slowly. There's an exquisite agony of waiting just long enough before you can't take the fear anymore and wake up the party before they're attacked. Instead of relaxation, resting has an air of unsettling anxiety. If you're attacked, and you will be if you wait too long, it's pure luck whether a party member wakes up. Sleeping characters are very easy to hit, and a very EP party can be destroyed in the first round with no chance of fighting back. From beginning to end, you're kept on your toes with no room for a breath in between, getting lost in the maze-like levels. In other words, I love it. There's no dead space in Wizardry 6. You're always on edge, asking where the danger is going to come from and how much time I have to rest and recuperate before I'm in danger again. The castle isn't just filled with an eerie atmosphere of decadent evil, it's also a puzzle you have to solve with locked doors, passwords, coded messages, and hidden paths. One of the first rooms you enter has 2 chests with the odd descriptions, "Open me first" and "Open me second." The items you receive change based on which one you open first, but the message is clearly displayed: "Beware the narrow corridors of the mind." It's a powerful clue about the plot and characters. Don't always believe exactly what you're told, make your own decisions. Door after door after door is locked. You can find keys randomly dropped from enemies, but not every key type works on every lock. It's best to try and pick them yourselves or wait for the knock spell. There is now a mini-game when unlocking doors or springing traps, another oddly modern touch from an era where mostly simple die rolls would determine success or failure. I feel like this pushed some players away from the game because it's not so intuitive when you're doing this. The traps issue is especially confusing at the start, but that's the glory of old school no guides fun, just jump in. After the standard bats and rats, there are hostile brigands and pirates who have set up shop in the castle ruins, and some of them are lizard men for some reason. Every time we open another door, a small piece of the puzzle is revealed, and often a teeny bit of treasure to make us just a little bit stronger. Behind one door is a pile of sleeping brigands. Behind another is a strange room filled with graffiti. Along with Trebor Sucks, a reference to the Jerky King in Wizardry 1, and Orc Rumble at 8 is a curious message about a missing Snoop Sherry, with reward if found. The writer of the note is a man named Lamontes, who stays in a locked room in one of the castle's 4 towers. Rather than pre-selected dialogue choices, the game uses the long-lost art of the text parser. We have to enter in keywords to get anywhere in dialogue, thus adding a puzzle element even to the NPC interactions. The system is not utilized to its full potential here, but imagine how complex and exciting a text parser system could be if it was developed over the past quarter century, instead of being relegated to the ancient gaming past. Conversations could be elaborate puzzles the player slowly unravels, secrets could be hidden within unusual word choices, studying how NPCs speak and what manner of speech would persuade them most could be a part of the gameplay. Instead, we have the simplified BioWarean or Bethesda systems. It's a tragedy. But we aren't thrown completely to the wolves in the starting level. We do have a friendly NPC, the merchant Queequeg. He sells basic gear, but it's vital to purchase as much armor as possible this early on if you want to survive. Oddly, his stock changes every time you go back to him, so don't get discouraged if that leather cuirass you wanted isn't available. Just leave and return and you'll have a whole new selection to choose from. Potions are very useful items, especially if they cure conditions you can't with your current spells. You may want to grab a few of the Cure Poison or Cure Disease spells at this stage, especially when you find the Key of Spades. With a special key, we can enter a chamber in the center tower behind which is a very tough zombie enemy. The zombie is attacked by vomiting, something that shows up in a bunch of JRPGs. It's a more disturbing way of fighting than the standard Western zombies that just punch. More Japanese influence there, eh, Bradley? It's important to cast a spell called Air Pocket when fighting zombies because they can nauseate or poison the entire party without it. I wish the Air Pocket spell had made it into Wizardry 8 because it's really useful and really cool. After the battle, yet more keys will get us into the disturbing chambers of the King and Queen. There is no music whatsoever, by the way, in Wizardry 6, but this can enhance rather than detract from the experience. The empty castle is creepy, dark, and dusty. Walking in absolute silence just adds to the sense of spookiness and danger. There are a few sparse noises of swinging swords connecting with armor or angry shouts of pirates. Otherwise, you're alone with your thoughts. Music is designed to push a certain feeling on you, and it's an important one. But sometimes being totally silent is the right vibe. You're more free to craft in your own head what you want to hear, and rather than what you should feel being pushed on you. Some of the background music in this video is from the Super Famicom and Sega Saturn versions of the game. The spooky vibes remind me, again, of the lack of music in most of From Software's Souls games. Music is nice, but the OG experience is silence that magnifies rather than detracts from a feeling of haunting menace. If a brand new soundtrack were ever made for a re-released Wizardry 6, I think a spooky ambiance would be better than a proper musical score. Let me know your thoughts on heavy music or light ambiance or silence in games and how it affects the experience. I'm curious what you think about that. Beyond the King's Chamber is a book in illegible code and disturbingly demonic accoutrement. We can't get rid of these things for the rest of the game as they're marked as important. It's time to take a break to talk about the thrilling topic of inventory management. Your inventory space is extremely limited at only 22 items, and that includes all of the items you have equipped. Space is at a high priority. You will constantly have to be juggling what items you can bring along and what you have to discard. And unlike the next game in the series, you can't leave items on the floor and pick them up later. Anything discarded is immediately gone forever. Some of those items you only need to use once, and yet they still remain in your inventory for the entire game after using them. This is kind of a good thing because back in the day it wasn't uncommon to be able to lose key items and soft lock you out of finishing the game. This is especially frustrating with hefty items like the rope and hook that weigh a ton. Oh yeah, weight is a factor as well as inventory slots. And weight is weirdly subject to a miserable bug. Theoretically, how much weight you can carry goes up the more strength you gain, and so each level it could go up by strength and you can carry more stuff, right? But the bug stops you from ever getting a higher carrying capacity than you had at character creation, no matter how high your strength gets. There's no sugarcoating this, it's terrible, primitive, and gets worse rather than better. Thankfully, multiple patches exist to fix this problem, and they're linked in the description bar. But are you really going to stop playing a great game just because moving junk in your backpack is boring?
Quit! You son from 1248, you grab your gear, you take a stroll down Washout Lane!
Don't be that guy. The game is more than worth dealing with a few irritating game systems. With these gruesome items, we can now explore the castle's dungeon. An unholy altar descends into a pit guarded by a giant snake, perhaps used for sacrifices of innocent maidens. If you don't have a few cure poison potions, this is likely going to be a reload. The lower level is far more dangerous, but we need to go there eventually to find the Jolly Roger decoder ring, a silly reference to prizes and cereal boxes that keeps the otherwise grim story lighthearted. There's a youthful joy running through the game, like all of the goofy fantasy from childhood, conjured up to make adulthood less bland and miserable. Past the dungeon is the Hazard Zone, and that name is no joke. It's filled with zombies and giant lamprey worms. Most of the sprites in the game reach out at the screen, adding a bit of a 3D effect. The art director of Wizardry 6 and 7 is the amazing Chris Appel, who crafted the look of the monsters in deluxe paint. He left a comment on my Wizardry 7 video wondering that people are still enjoying his work 30 years later. And if you ever see this, Chris Appel, I just want to personally thank you for making such enjoyable, scary, fun artwork, and you're still appreciated over 3 decades later. Thank you. Another issue to bring up here is that you may have noticed both this cave and the Hazard Zone are sort of a bit gray. Yeah, they look quite a bit like the castle area, and you'll be seeing that same gray stone over and over again the entire game. D.W. Bradley bit off more than he could chew in terms of background art. We may not be in wireframe mode anymore, but there's little besides gray brick walls and water in the background. We do explore tropical pyramids, subterranean rivers, dwarven mines, swamps, forests, and evil temples, yet they all look like this. Use your imagination, kids. At the end of the Hazard Zone, we discover 2 women with spears and a tropical dress code. They shimmy across our rope bridge and disappear, along with the bridge. We have a rope to throw across the chasm that we found back in the castle, but nothing to snag it on the other side. Where can we get a large metal hook? Who's known for having hooks? In order to progress the story, we have to invade the pirate's den. To enter, we need a password provided to us by the friendly rogue Lamontes. But to see the Frenchman, we need a code word from Queequeg. If we ask about Lamontes, he'll tell us his beloved is his beagle named Snoopsherry, the name on the wall from before. So if we find the dog, now dead and stuffed, and return it to Lamontes, we'll get the location of hidden pirate treasure. Everything seems to have like 10 steps to it in this game. You slowly unwind the puzzle bit by bit until it's gone, revealing the path to the next zone. The dog is in a locked chest in a cave behind a wall we have to open by causing a rat avalanche with stinky cheese. These rats are not like the ones before. The fat rat is a true ROUS, ready to rip our throats out if we haven't got a few levels under your belt. Yeah, this isn't a simplistic fetch quest, this is difficult to figure out. With Snoopsherry we learn where the pirates buried their treasure, leading us to the next area, the giant mountain. Telling Queequeg the location will get us the password to the pirate's den, Skeleton Crew. By the way, if you kill Queequeg, you can go and claim the pirate treasure yourself. If you tell him and leave him alive, you can still go dig up the treasure, but all that's left is some useless junk and a note from Queequeg thanking you for helping him. Somehow this quest is bugged because even if you don't tell him the location, and he's still alive, he finds out somehow and gets the treasure anyway. This isn't really a serious moral choice though, it's entirely practical. We need him alive to sell our trash to for most of the game. With the password we can enter an adolescent boy's pirate fantasy of drunken cutthroats in a smoky gambling den. Thick smoke fills the air inside this mangy den, and huddled about each of the tables, clutching a bottle of ale or steaming brew, is the wildest gang of thieves, rogues, brigands, pirates, and cutthroats ever assembled under a single roof. As soon as you enter the room, action grinds to a halt. All eyes rivet onto you, and a deadly silence ensues. Glancing at each of the tables, it is amazing how much you can notice within a single second. A pile of gold coins, the faces on a deck of cards, even the chip on a corner of a set of dice. All this, and every little detail of every nasty face staring at you as well. In the odd moment you have before you think you are going to die, something about the situation will stand out as if to tell you a secret, or solution to your impending demise. It is just such a moment, and you cast your gaze across the room, away from the faces and stink and smoke, and you behold a curious sight. Mounted behind steel bars, erect, sporting a twisted smile, come grimace, is the preserved figure of a man dressed in scarlet tailcoat, white ruffled shirt, blue knickers, a black tricorn hat, and wearing locks of black curly hair 2 feet long. It isn't the black patch which covers an eye, nor the stuffed green parrot on top of his shoulder, nor even the odd expression that haunts his queer face which holds your attention. It's that upon his right arm, just where a hand should be, there protrudes a polished hook made of bright steel. We can choose to prove ourselves by drinking rounds of grog, a max constitution score will help you out with that, or we can fight everyone. Since we have to fight them anyway if we want to steal their treasure, it's easier just to do battle. This boss fight is a good way to learn if you're strong enough to leave the starting area. After the battle, we find the skeleton of the old pirate captain and our goal, his shiny steel hook.
One-eyed Willie.
Sadly, the captain's eye patch is cursed, otherwise I'd wear it the whole game. The stuffed parrot he has, though, you can equip, and it will naturally give you an extra point of personality, this game's version of charisma, which obviously you would from a stuffed parrot. So attaching the captain's hook to the rope, we can create a grappling hook and reach the second area of the game, the mines. We are not completely done with the castle, however. Wizardry 6 has a touch of Metroidvania about it. We can't access certain sections until we gain access to keys or items in later areas. Then we have to backtrack here to progress. And it's not always easy to remember what you need. A dozen hours can go by pushing everything out of your mind from the early area. In fact, a good way to do this, I suppose, if you're willing to not use cheats, is to write down every single area and door in the castle that you were unable to open, because that means you'll probably have to go back to it. Although you won't necessarily know if you've gotten the item you need to open it in another area, so yeah, it's rough. It's very confusing, but the castle is still the best opening level in the series. It certainly beats the confusing, ultra-hard mess in Wizardry 7, and even the monastery, itself one of the great opening levels in gaming, in Wizardry 8. The castle is very satisfying because it's mysterious, has a lot of puzzles, and it has a slow burn plot reveal that you gradually unravel over time. The opening level is light on explanation, but the mood is unmistakable. This is an eerie castle, abandoned many generations after fell deeds. Evil is the norm in this upside-down place where monsters rule and light is banished. Good is an intruder on a land of evil instead of the other way around. You can picture the dust coating the floor, distant rustling in dark corners, and the unspoken horrors that took place there in the distant past. You won't be beset by needy idiots demanding you kill 6 rats or bring a letter to a friend across town.
Good day. If my tribe is to survive the winter, I'll need 15 boar hides from now.
And frankly, I find that very soothing. What's better, idiotic, boring fetch quests at the start of the game to get the first couple of levels, or just being tossed into the frying pan with a bunch of really tough enemies that are going to kill you a bunch of times until you get good? I know which one I'd pick. Very slowly you'll get closer and closer to vital plot-relevant items and farther into the king and queen's wicked domain. Both seem to be degenerates of one kind or another. Wizardry 6 sets it up very early that neither of these two blackguards can be trusted. Both of them were obsessed with their own twisted desires and paid a price for it. The second floor holds some faint clues in the decaying remnants of the royal bedchamber. One of the most important things to remember is an odd bill of sale for a 14-year-old girl, the product of illicit love between a holy man and a commoner. The king's heinous appetites are not hard to imagine. But anyway, we throw the hook across, it snags on a boulder, and we're able to get into the next area. We then place the astonishingly heavy rope and hook in our backpack after slaying a particularly nasty giant carnivorous plant and riding down a primitive elevator. It's on to the mountains. The Amazonians have run off to, what the flavor text assures me is, a gigantic stepped pyramid next to a lava-belching volcano. The pyramid is inaccessible right now, so we have to skirt along the edge. Those pits are instant death, by the way, so be careful where you walk. The Dwarven mines are easily the most frustrating part of Wizardry 6. They're a vast maze with multiple levels, several exits, and even areas of darkness. This is a good time to mention that there is no map in this game. Even Wizardry 7 had the mapping skill to get some kind of orientation. You're utterly on your own here in 6. Before modern walkthroughs, you could get lost in the mines for days or weeks. Purists won't like this, but when I play the game nowadays, I always use a mod, again linked in the description, that auto-maps the game. It decreases the agony of confusion considerably. Auto-mapping is clearly going against the designer's intentions, but, well, even if getting lost is part of the game, well, you see, back in ye olden days...
Hey everybody, an old man's talking!
Before Steam libraries told you exactly how long you played a game, an RPG was a major time investment. Depending on how much time you put in each week, an entire year could go by before you completed one playthrough. I don't necessarily want to go back to those days, because my attention span has been brutally murdered by the internet, same as anyone else's. But I do like to reflect on it at least. I at least feel guilty about using an automap, but not guilty enough to stop. Just enough to think wistfully about a slower time gone by. Battles in the mines feature dwarves who are rather atypically depicted as nearly naked men with greenish beards that have clearly gone insane. Along with them are giants with hammers that seem to be carved out of solid emerald. One of the dwarves is friendly though. Smitty sells weapons and only weapons, for some reason. There is no armor you can get at this point. Maybe it would make the following area too easy? I don't know. But he's really important for the plot, so make a note of where he is. Giant ants have also taken up residence in the tunnels. They aren't dangerous unless a super ant called a Vaspes shows up. The battles can be especially trying in the darkness areas because you can forget where you were going and which way you were facing. A spell, though, exists called Direction, which is very cheap to cast, that will show you exactly what cardinal direction you're facing in. That doesn't help perfectly to find where you are, but it's better than nothing. First, we must collect 4 separate rubber bands from rubber beasts, giant plant monsters. Then tie them together and attach them to a disused catapult. After that, the sprocket from the catapult must be repaired, reattached, and then fired. And in order to fire it, we need to get giant boulders from the giants in the area. This requires traversing the entire mine area, part of the giant mountains, removing the sprocket, taking it back to Smitty so he can fix the sprocket, then returning to the catapult, putting on the rubber band and sprocket, then firing. You can also miss the target and have to fire again and again after finding another boulder. I don't know anyone on Earth who would simply allow that. If you miss, just quit and reload and do it again until you hit it. It's very long and frustrating even if you know exactly what to do. If you don't, it takes a long time of trial and error. But there are a bunch of treasure chests down in the dungeons, so you might as well explore the Dwarven mines quite a bit. Even if that means going through all of the long areas of darkness or different areas. Also inside the mines is a very important update on the plot. We can find Zorfidus, the demon-summoning wizard from the intro, and learn more of his story. My time is short, for as you can see, my body has long ago died, and it is only through the last vestiges of my former power that my spirit has held this final grasp upon your world. I am half of the former wizard known as Zorfidus, whose bones you see on the mantle before you. 120 years ago, I engaged upon the quest for the Cosmic Forge, the Bane that whosoever shall scribe with the pen, not upon the Cosmic Circle, will suffer his writ as a Bane, and shall not rest, or be freed from it, until a new generation has passed. Once I was Zorfidus, a great wizard of magic and power, and like all who taste of power, the more I drank of it, the greater became my thirst. So it was that I came to make an unholy pact with another whose hunger was a copy of my own, and together we held the dream of universal domination. When at last we heard of this cosmic pen, we knew that to make it our own would make our triumph complete. So we plotted a scheme which yielded us the Cosmic Forge. I was determined to defy the fates, and so scribed the words which told of this mortal wizard Zorfidus, and how he shall know all things in the universe, that he will then know how to evade that dreadful Bane. And yes, I came to possess full knowledge of everything, and with it was I ripped asunder, twain into two, for the nature of all things is divided, that which it is and is not, and thus as the knowledge lived in me as one, thus it must pass that I then became divided. For as I know all, I must also know nothing. As it was that a man shall know good, so was I compelled to also know evil. Thus shall men forever seek to know, and thus will men always be divided. This is the nature of knowledge, and I tell you that this is how it lives inside of you. This is how you know, this is how you think, this is how a mind believes, and how a mind speaks unto itself. Though I, Zorfidus, am dead, Zorfidus, my other half, lives on, and as I do but aid thee, he shall do but harm thee. His knowledge is incomplete, since I possessed its complement, and he can but stumble blindly, half right and half wrong, in everything he does, a mind forever floating through a pool of darkened waters. He is insane, as am I, but you must seek him out, for as I know of the pen and why, and do tell you, he will know the where and the when of it, but not what. And he will not tell you. That is what must be discovered from him, and with him lives the fate of the forge, the pen, and the hand of destiny.
What the fuck does that mean?
It's hard to make out exactly what to believe here. Zorfidus appears to have pulled an Alessa Gillespie move and split his soul into two pieces. The good side of his soul is imprisoned in this secret hideout. He also brings up the infamous pen that gives this game, and the trilogy, its title, the Cosmic Forge. The Forge is a magical artifact created by the gods that allows them to shape the universe. It's a literal interpretation of the power of the author in fiction to craft reality with your own words. But the pen is cursed. If it's used outside of the home of the gods, the cosmic circle we visit at the end of Wizardry 8, every wish granted turns into a terrible bane. The bane, or curse, twists the user's desires like a genie's wish into something evil. This is so important to remember. The game tells us again about the wizard's apprentice using the pen to make himself irresistible to the queen so he could seduce her. Unfortunately, the queen loves serpents, so he was transformed into a giant constrictor. Can you trust someone who loves snakes? We need to remember how slippery a snake lover can be if we ever meet that queen. There's a lot of exculpation in the Mad Wizard's speech, so we don't really know exactly what happened and how evil his united personality was. I don't think it was particularly good. But now his evil half is guarding the pen, and he's the ultimate villain we must destroy in order to capture it. There's little left of the evil king, though. I wonder where he got to. With the catapult functioning, we can finally skirt around the edge of the mountain and enter the temple. First, though, we have to climb up the mountain face. And no, there was no climbing skill in Wizardry 6 like in 7. but you can still fall crashing down to the earth for massive damage if you're unlucky. It's basically just saving and reloading again and again until you get it right. At the top of the mountain is a brutal boss fight against two mighty giants. One is a spellcaster, somehow, and can blind your entire party, while the other can pulverize characters with his huge hammer. If you've ever played an RPG before, you know which one we have to hit first, the spellcaster. At the mountain's peak, we find a massive stone head guarding something called the Rock. The Rock is a glittering jewel, of vital importance to advancing the plot. The stone head guarding it is also very tough, and magic tends not to work well against him. Tragically, the game gives you no information about how to use the rock or where. It's also possible you'll go outside of the giant boss room and leave to go into the next area without going upstairs and finding the rock, which means you're going to be screwed over later on, but it was a different time. With the jewel, we can finally make our way down to the base of the Amazonian pyramid. Hordes of moldering corpses bar our path through the Amazon's burial chambers. Zombies are dangerous because their stench causes nausea and paralysis. In the catacombs is a mysterious pile of sand. No indication how or why we should care, though. The pyramid is of course guarded by hordes of those Amazulu warriors. The basic spearmen or archers are trivial even in great numbers, but the shaman casts dangerous spells and need to be obliterated immediately.
Ata! Ata!
Yes, Ata.
The pyramid is, I shouldn't have to repeat myself at this point, a maze with confusticating puzzles, switches, and locked doors. Inside a locked chest, we get the dubious reward of an empty sack. Wow. This is probably the most perplexing part of the entire game, and perhaps of any Wizardry game. What could this possibly be for? I would be amazed if anyone figured this out on their own, so if you played the game back then, let me know if you figured it out without hints. Remember that pile of sand in the catacombs? You can fill the bag up with sand and use it to solve a deadly puzzle. With the sack, we descend into the very bottom of the pyramid. It's much more dangerous here because of the undead pharaohs, very colorful skeletal potentates that cast deadly spells. It's vital to have at least one character with Dispel Undead, if not several, to trash large groups of them in a stroke. If you fail to dispel them, using silence will prevent them from casting, and the very useful anti-magic shell causes them to fizzle spells. Anti-magic spell tends to be a little stronger, so I tend to use that first rather than silence, which has a greater tendency to fail. But even with all of your anti-magic abilities, one fireball can get through from these guys and it will be devastating. Reaching the final boss is incredibly hard because you have to go against your instincts to find the right path. A set of buttons open up pits you have to navigate, but contrary to common sense, you don't want to avoid all the pits. One of them is crucial to fall into intentionally, then climb out of the other side of the pit so you can reach a hidden chamber with the boss. Yeah, it's just plain cruel and indefensible. That final boss is the mighty mummy Amun Tutbutt. The same magic-canceling abilities will work on him and his cronies, but if he resists it, your party will be incinerated in seconds. Now comes the puzzle. Tutbutt's treasure is trapped, and taking it will send you into another pit surrounded by enemies, and cause fall damage. But if you have the bag of sand, you can do the old Indiana Jones switcheroo and escape unscathed. Our reward is the Idol of Malmumu that grants us access to the very top of the pyramid. At the top of the pyramid's peak is the Amazulu Queen and her court. Anchoring her will result in a tough battle and is best avoided. The Queen asks if we have come for the rock, telling her yes, and that's the fight. But if we say no, we have the option to give the Queen a gift. You have plenty of trash items laying around that you can give her, but I usually give her something like an amulet or a ring, something nice, because we are trying to rob her after all. Being nice will let you trade with the Queen's shaman, Kuwali Cubona, who has a bunch of magic items and, crucially, good books so you can learn spells automatically. Kuwali also sells a mysterious item called foot powder, which you definitely need to buy. The top of the volcano is our destination, and the ground there is so hot it will cause damage with every footstep. Without the foot powder or the levitation spell, or a ton of healing items, you're essentially dead. On the edge of the volcano we encounter Malmumu himself, a vicious fire demon sent to guard the stone. This is about the time you need to invest in the Fire Shield spell. It greatly reduces all fire damage and is necessary for later fights against spellcasters and demons. After slaying Malmumu, we now have 2 gemstones and no real direction about what to do with them. It's entirely possible that you can make it through the pyramid here and just say, I have no idea where to go next. but we need to return to the castle all the way back at the beginning and get through some doors with the 2 gemstones we found. First we find a wailing ghost that adds a little bit of flavor and fun to the story in one of the castle's towers. I remember. Yes, I remember a long time ago. I was a holy man, a pious and revered man. I broke my vows of sanctity for you, sweet Annie, and I was punished. Punished! Our daughter! We must hide our little girl, O she who was conceived from sin. And she is damned, and it is we who are damned. The king has found us. The king has taken our daughter. His sob story is another little important hint about the plot, and he drops a very important item, the Horn of Souls. Next, it's back to the castle's basement, where 20 hours or so before, you might, but definitely will not, remember a door with 2 vacant eye holes. The jewels fit inside the door, the entire reason we went to the mines in the mountains, and they lead us to the next area, the river Styx. The gloomy waters are wreathed in a frothy brume. Raising the horn to our lips, a sepulchral call spills out on the river of the dead. Answering the wail is a robed oarsman in a creaky boat. Hey, if D.W. Bradley can get away with the purple prose, so can I. With a few quick coins slid to the Reaper, he carries us across the river to the Isle of the Damned. We're now officially in the late game, and enemies aren't screwing around anymore. Night Gaunts are purple demons ripped straight out of Lovecraft. They attack in large groups and can blind the party en masse, making battles much longer and deadlier than usual. Sometimes I just quit the game and reload if my entire party is subjected to blindness, silence, irritation, etc. An odd part of the OG experience is that unlike Wizardry 7, there's no terminate game option to quit out of a frustrating battle and start over. You're expected to fight to the death every time and only decide to reload after combat. Fortunately, the auto-map mod lets you play in a windowed mode, so I just quit out of a bad fight. Night Gaunts are demons, and they can be banished with the Astral Gate spell.
In the name of Lorik, Prince of Elves, demon be gone!
The Isle of the Damned mini-boss is a mighty demonic creature guarding the key to the catacombs. More undead beasties guard the treasures of the damned. Disturbing the bones looking for treasure will get you into a fight against powerful ghosts. The ghosts are difficult to hit and deadly spellcasters to boot. The ghosts even have zombie guards that are very unfairly scattered about into different stacks, preventing you from dispelling them all at once. All of the ghosts are mini-bosses, some of whom can cast very dangerous spells. But they do have some humor there because they all have funny tombstones with joke names on them. Sir Isaac Wizenstein, all those brains and he still didn't get it. Narcissus gotta love me, didn't need anybody, didn't have anybody. Wild Billy Restless, never stood still, never saw it coming. Bully Big Bossy, very well respected. They shot him 237 times. Grandfather Irarabi, would die for cause, killed millions instead. Mad Bomber Irarabi, fighter with a cause, killed mostly children. This is a great place to level, and you're going to need to level for what goes on later. But the real reason for coming is finding a book describing the Sirens. In order to navigate the perilous waters of the Styx, we have to ride a leaky boat upriver to the infamous water monsters of Greek myth. The Sirens begin singing to us, but fortunately we've read of their woe and thus know how things go. Telling them we know madness makes them free saves our lives, and we get a very useful gift, the water wings. Come to think of it, I've never actually just swam up to the Sirens without finding their book first. I wonder if you can just skip the catacombs altogether. Not that that's a great idea, because you have to grind out levels, but, you know, it's interesting. I like to picture the shoes as a set of winged sandals like Artemis or Perseus has. They allow us to traverse the river and begin exploring, and yes, for some reason we can rest on the water, which is very peculiar. There is, even by this game's low standards, very little guidance about what to do next, and some very big tricks to avoid. I've been defending this game's obtuseness up to this point, but I can't in this area. They went too far here. The monsters lurking in the river can be brutal. Mostly it's a mix of sea serpents and giant mosquito swarms. But sirens, despite making peace with them before, still stalk the party. Some are actually spellcasters that cast brutal spells like Psionic Blast and Prismic Missile, but they do also give a massive amount of experience, so there's good and bad. The real issue though is not dragons or witches, it's crabs, nature's deadliest opponent. Yes, it's giant crabs that attack in swarms, sometimes a few dozen or so at a time. They are seemingly weak to nothing, hit like trucks, and have a ton of HP. I like to think this is some continuity Wizardry 6 has with Wizardry 8, another game with vicious crab monsters. And also another similarity between this and the Souls games, which also, against all reason and logic, decided to create giant crustacean enemies in multiple games. Our goal on the river, puzzling as it may be, is to reach the Isle of the Dead that Charon showed us at the start. The door is locked and getting the key is a process. First we must land on a sandy beach shore. Yeah, it looks like stone, but just go with it. Searching every square of the beach reveals a key that leads to another key that finally leads to one of the cylinders of ash, special burial receptacles that Charon wants. The shore is guarded by island giants, bigger, tougher versions of the giants from the mountains that can wipe the whole party, and they can show up in large numbers for some reason. The giants are guarding the cylinder of ash we need to get to the Isle of the Dead. You can fight Charon, by the way, but I highly recommend you don't. You don't receive anything useful from the fight, and it's gimmick-based. Charon insta-kills an enemy every round, meaning you have to defeat him in 6 rounds or it's game over. It would be cool though if you could kill him and get an ultra-powerful weapon like a magic scythe that one-shots enemies or something, but maybe that would be overpowered. It's around this time that you may want to consider multi-classing. As long as you have the stats for it, you can switch your character's class at any time. They may continue to upgrade skills from previous classes, so a priest can continue increasing theology even if they switched over to a bard and on and on. They can lead to some remarkably broken characters like an entire party that has critical hit, or expert spellcasters and melee mixed together. Because you're in a late game area with super high level enemies soon, you will gain levels super fast, letting you swiftly make your characters into near demigods. But I tend not to multi-class for this reason, it's just too broken and easy to cheese. But it's a great option if the game is proving too tough for you. You don't need to cheat, just spend a little bit of extra time grinding a new class. You can switch back to your old class anytime you want, unlike Wizardry 8, so have fun and go nuts. Before reaching the Isle of the Dead though, we still have some optional stuff to do. I say optional, but I always do this because it helps grab a few more levels before the endgame. First up, we have to find a fishing line and explore the river Styx. At a spot marked with an X, well, 3 spaces east and 1 square north of that X, we use the fishing hook to dredge up Davy Jones's locker. Inside is a key to a locked gate. Beyond the gate is a swamp filled with snake men, goblins, and drow. It was probably for this reason that the gate was locked and nobody goes here. The drow are deadly archers who can cast blinding flash, deadly poison, and even summon monsters, because remember they have alchemy spells as rangers. The goblins are some of the most annoying enemies in the game. It was bold of D.W. Bradley to choose one of the weakest enemies in conventional D&D to be frustratingly difficult. The magical goblin shamans and priests can launch firebombs at the party. And since they come in packs of 5 or 6, that's 6 fireballs potentially lobbed at the party in one round. I often just reload when fighting them, to be honest. In fact, I do that a lot, unless I can get off one of those hits every enemy en masse spells like Mind Flay against them. Maybe I'm cheating, but when I get a super frustrating random encounter, I just quit and reload, and I suggest you do the same. If only running away was more effective, but it's basically impossible to use. It barely ever works, so save scumming it is. Deep in the swamp, we can find the caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland. Wizardry 6 reminds me a lot of those old D&D adventures from the 70s and early 80s, the modules where there were a ton of goofy jokes and references sprinkled throughout. Gary Gygax would be proud of Wizardry 6. The caterpillar has lost his famed hookah pipe, and sends us off to get it for him, and it's no easy feat. First we need to find Mai Lei, an Amazulu lady who just so happens to be the best merchant in the entire game. 3/4 of the way through the game and we finally find some decent stuff to buy. She has the blade Cuisinart, one of the best swords in the game, the Bushido blade, a katana so we can finally upgrade our samurai or ninja, full plate mail, Tosedo samurai armor, a better spear for the Valkyrie, and on and on. She should really just have everything she could sell automatically. There's really no point in forcing the player to go through the reloading rigmarole, but you have to do it, I guess. It adds yet another weird sense of gambling to the game. Mylay is also guarding a storeroom with the caterpillar's hookah pipe. Sadly, we need a claim number to give her for the pipe, meaning we have to ask the bottle oracle. Remember that empty wine bottle you get in the first hour of the game and couldn't throw away because it's a quest item? No? I didn't think so. Who would remember that? But take it and place the caterpillar's message inside, attach a cork so it floats, and drop it in the river. It washes up on the shore and has the claim number. Convenient.
God damn, these people are confusing.
The number is Mylay's measurements, by the way. Pretty sneaky, DW. With the claim number, we can finally get the hookah pipe, but only after a quick fight against Bork, a tiny man with a big hammer, not a regular hammer, not a +1 hammer, a hammer plus 1.5, so you know he means business. With the hookah pipe in hand, we return to the caterpillar and he rewards us with some very special mushrooms. He also sells us incense. I said the swamp was optional, and technically it is, but that incense he sells makes the climactic area of the river so much easier. Before doing any of this, make sure you exhaust all the stuff you want from Mylay and the caterpillar. Reclaiming the pipe means she and the caterpillar will disappear forever. This is a titanic and unnecessary frustration, and in no way excusable. Especially your first time playing, it's miserable to find that out. That's part of the reason for this video, is to prepare noobs for the nonsense they have to deal with so they don't get frustrated and quit too early. Now we can finally make our way to the feared Isle of the Dead. After returning the ashes, the crypt door opens and we can explore. The hallway is enormous, with dozens of side rooms to go into. Without burning incense at the tomb, our party is silenced every time we cross a certain square. The hallway is a massive troll, forcing the party to check every single square for a key to open up the final door. Your first time in, you may spend hours fighting ghosts and skeleton lords before figuring out what to do. In fact, you may just want to look up where to go, to be honest. Without grinding out these fights, though, you may be a bit under level for the game's conclusion, so it's kinda tricky to decide what to do. You do need to do some grinding in this game. But it still feels tedious even if there's a mechanical reason that you have to fight for this area. I love how the spiders are shown to be skittering around up on the ceiling like that. It's pretty cute. Within the crypt is a series of optional bosses that give amazing weapons and armor. It is bizarre that this is done right after, like maybe less than an hour after you find Mylay. They are grouped together too closely, but never mind that. Both Wizardry 7 and especially 8 make it much harder to find decent loot, because most of it is randomized. It's so convenient to find so much great stuff as a guaranteed drop, especially because you can transfer 6 of those great weapons, 1 per character, to Wizardry 7. Even though the fights are optional, they sort of function like a test to see if your party is strong enough for the endgame. If you're having trouble, just run down to the handy-dandy fountain that restores both health and spell points, and grind out a level or 3 and try again. The easiest boss is Robin Windamarn, our Drow Elf Archer. Her allies aren't a match for your strongest spells at this point, and even Robin herself is a bit of a pushover. Her treasure is strong armor for a ranger or bard, and the coveted elven bow. It's the strongest in the game and transferable all the way to Wizardry 8. Next up is the Black Knight. He's a bit tougher because of better resistances and stronger spells, including Lifesteal, a spell you'll be becoming intimately familiar with at the end of the game, because it can one-shot anyone it hits. And I literally mean anyone. It does thousands of points of damage, instantly killing basically anyone. So you better resist it. It's another gambling thing. If you don't make that dice roll, then you're screwed. Whittling him and his Dark Crusaders down with physical attacks is the best strat. Your reward for victory is the toughest plate armor in the game, the Ebony Armor. It gives a whopping -14 AC to head, body, and legs. Your Lord or Valkyrie will be near invincible to melee attacks. He also drops the Avenger, a mighty sword with a chance to critically hit enemies. This is usually my fighter or lord's weapon for the rest of the game and all of Wizardry 7 too. Third is where the champions truly start getting dangerous. Brigard Dans Voltan is a mighty Valkyrie with a horde of warrior maidens at her behest. Brigard carries the Maenad's Lance, a Valkyrie-only spear that has a 10% critical strike chance. But it's even worse if she tries to cast spells. Her lightning spell can rip apart your back row casters and leave even your tough melee fighters grievously wounded. Her troops can then mop up the party on the next round, so make sure to cast those defensive spells. Trying to silence Brigard is highly recommended, so use that silence and anti-magic shell or face the wrath of Valhalla. If you defeat her, you get that Maenad's Lance though, so if you have a Valkyrie in your party, she can deal devastating hits, including crits from the back row. She also drops the best gloves and boots in the game, completing your -14 to armor class and making a fighter, lord, or Valkyrie essentially a tank. Brigard also drops the most important bard item in the game, the Prometheus Horn. Finally, after so many hours of being underpowered, the bard is now vastly overpowered. Yeah, it doesn't fix it exactly, it just takes it to the opposite extreme. Bards can now cast Fireball over and over again with the horn, just an unlimited fireball without need for spell points for the rest of the game. Finally, in a little secret side area, we have by far the toughest opponent. The preceding champions are strong, but manageable for a well-built party. Daimyo Hayato Daikuta is in a class of his own, and you may just need to skip this guy if you face him too many times and die. This samurai warlord enters battle with at least 6 samurai, all of whom can cast Fireball, and he can too, along with ninjas, just as an extra layer of spitefulness directed at you, the player. Naturally, Fire Shield, Anti-Magic Shell, and Magic Screen are a must. I don't even know if it's possible to silence Hayato because it never seems to work for me, but you may want to try silencing his samurai companions at the very least. Summoning in some monsters to tank hits for the party is also very helpful. Hayato does, however, carry the legendary Muramasa Blade, arguably the second strongest weapon in the entire game. It can melee for double damage, has a +4 hit modifier, is only one-handed, has a 15% critical strike chance, extra swings with each attack, and even adds elemental resistance to the wielder. Anyone in melee range will be chopped to pieces faster than you can say sushi. Hayato also seems to be very resistant to magical attacks. Oddly, the best spell I've found to use against him is the alchemist spell Deadly Poison. I don't know why, but this spell in particular he just doesn't seem to have a good resistance to. It does great initial damage, like 50 or 60 points, and will kill him over time, so as long as you can survive the onslaught for a few rounds, he should go down swiftly. But a lot of that plan revolves around luck, so a few reloads are probably necessary. With the Samurai Lord dead, your samurai gets the mighty Muramasa and gains the strongest armor for samurai for even better melee protection. After we strike down the champions, we can proceed with the main plot. The far north of the crypt houses an empty tomb, where we finally meet the lord of the castle. It turns out that the king has somehow turned into a vampire. Presumably that was his bane when he used the Cosmic Forge. I really like his design here. It seems very like a comical, almost stereotypical version of a Bela Lugosi vampire with sort of a Nosferatu head. The Super Famicom version makes him into a sort of more Castlevania-y vampire, and I don't think that works quite as well. To be honest, I don't really see how this is much of a curse. I mean, I would love to be turned into a vampire by the Cosmic Forge. I mean, you get to live forever, drink blood. Sounds pretty awesome. But I guess the king considers it a curse or something. I guess this explains why he's still alive, or undead after 120 years have gone by. But honestly, I'm not seeing much of a Bane here. I mean, sure, like his immortal soul is gone or whatever, yada yada yada, but I mean, come on, he's a vampire and he's got a hot demon girl. I mean, that sounds pretty awesome to me.
I became a vampire to suck blood and to fuck forever.
The king is unkillable here. We just have to survive for a few rounds of combat. He can drain your health permanently though, so that sucks. Get it? Sucks. Vampire. Also, you may not want to tell him you're here for Rebecca, which is the name of his daughter, because he gets kinda angry. It may make him attack you for longer. I don't have any proof of this, maybe I'm just being paranoid, but maybe making insinuations about the man's daughter is a bad idea. Eventually, the king just gets bored with you and flies away, leaving the key to the queen's burial chamber. I seek revenge. You are the ones I have awaited. I shall tell you of the Bane evil that has transpired here, in this castle of darkness. A story to chill your bones and harden your veins. Many years ago, a lustful and powerful lord ruled this land, a descendant of an anointed king. The blood of his ancestors cried within him to once again become a mighty king. To make a king requires more than just a crown, for a king must also have the power to control or he will fall. True power is the power of control. To he without control, he is powerless. And so he studied of control. He put what he discovered into practice, and he found that the average man was easy prey, for he that acted with authority. He found as long as he acted, as if his was some divine power, others would bow to him and submit to his rule, and never thought to question his authority. And so he built the Dark Temple which lies north of the castle, and adopted as its symbol the symbol of the Ramm, a creature already viewed with suspicion and fear by the foolish and weak. And this would-be king went mad. His dream of power took control of him as such thirsts are wont, and he began an unholy crusade, feeding upon those too weak to resist his call of majesty, and he then turned to darker powers, calling forth the demons of hell. Soon his powers grew along with his desire, and as he drank of this well, he never suspected how it was fueled by his own inner soul. And one day he was asked to return the price of his power, to repay the favor to the secret darker forces which were behind his earthly conquests. And this favor was most foul indeed. And so he secured a woman, mistress of a holy man, and in a horrid ritual at stroke of midnight, she was mated with a demon from hell, that this demon had then a legitimate claim to this world, and so the demon child was born. And upon her 13th year the king sent for her, for he had formed a bond with another powerful agent, and used her as bait for the trap. The demonic sire fell victim to their alliance. Thus was he free to claim the girl for his own, that he could further his own power through those she inherited from her demon father. And then his lust for power became his lust for her. For her! And I, who was his queen, high priest, and one-time lover, was discarded, and he took her instead, and I became nothing. It was after her 14th year that she asked him of her powers, the story of her nature, and he told her mother but a common whore, her father a demon of hell, and she had but one wish, that they be put to death. She was a demon child, she had her own mother put to death, and the holy man her lover is likewise put to death. And then came the Bane pen. When she had finished scrying his wish of the pen, 3 things happened. First was my own death, suffered by a blow dealt by the demoness herself. Second, she became pregnant, carrying his son, a bastard thing from hell. And third, he himself was changed. His wish was to become immortal, but he did not reconcile the curse of the Bane pen, and I spit upon him and her, and I shall not rest while they live. You must destroy them, you must not listen to their lies. They will attempt to deceive you, but do not listen. I will give you something to help you against them, but you must not forget what I have told you. Take this key, enter into the chamber where she sleeps and destroy her, and take this holy relic that it may protect you against their power. He will try to stop you, but this can stop him. Now you must go. Destroy them before they destroy you. I will have my revenge. The Queen offers us a story fueled by her bitter rage against the king. In any other game, this would be the moment where the final battle is explained to us so we can defeat the big bad. She hands us a magical silver cross and tells us to slay her husband. What she says contradicts other things we've heard in the past, however. The Queen was herself very evil and brought about her own death by making a wish with the Cosmic Forge. The cross, unlike all necessary items, can be dropped, hinting that we don't really need it. With or without the cross, a key in the Queen's tomb leads us to the final area of the crypt. Inside, we meet a lovely demon lady named Rebecca. She is, quite well designed.
She's just a load of pixels. Yeah? But what pixels?
This is one of the only moments where the Super Famicom version fails us, because they cover up her, attributes. She asks us if we want to kill her, and really, who would want to do that? But whatever you choose, she uses her demonic powers to hypnotize you and force her to meet her father again. The king feasts on your blood and orders you locked away in the dungeon. When we emerge, we'll finally be at the end of the game and ready to slay the Bane King and claim the powers of the cosmos. The gloomy dungeon can be escaped in 2 ways, by showing the dagger of Ramm to the guards at the door, or the more fun way of eating magic mushrooms. We shrink down Alice in Wonderland style and escape through a crack in the wall. With that out of the way, we've reached the final stage of the game, the forest. Inside the forest are the same drow, goblins, and yuan ti from the swamp, but deadly ninjas and undead are thrown in for some extra spice. Ninjas can insta-kill you just like your own Black Pajama Boys, so get ready to reload a lot. There's also an extremely rare Tyrannosaurus enemy. He has thousands of hit points and takes ages to kill, but actually isn't that tough. The poor guy seems to have trouble actually hitting any of your characters. If you're willing to spend ages whittling down his health, you get a metric ton of XP though. This is one of the few times stamina might become an issue in the game. Amazing that they actually went through all the effort of designing him and putting him in the game as some kind of a joke, I guess? Our goal is the evil temple built by the Bane King to further his dark power. Reaching the temple is easy, but figuring out how to get in is hard. The guards at the gate will attack you if you try to enter, but that's not really the issue. Inside is an impassable barrier. The only way to enter is to seek guidance in the dark forest. Inside the dark forest, and yes, it is a darkness zone, and just as annoying as it always is, we can find Tinkerbell. With the little fey creature, we can use her at a set of sparkling fairy lights to talk to the Fairy Queen. She tells us what we need to do to talk to the Delphi, an oracle deep in the dark forest. After bumping around in the darkness and fighting obnoxious firebomb-hurling gremlins, we reach the Delphi. With the required passphrase, we can get the Staff of Ramm, a cursed artifact that we can use to finally enter the Temple of the Bane King. The temple has higher-level enemies who can drop excellent loot, so it's better to level in there than out in the forest. The temple is a straightforward path without any puzzles or winding roads. The only obstacles are brutal fights against the champions of the wizard Zorfidus. These include ninjas, dark crusaders, samurai, pharaohs, and a host of other baddies. You'll notice here, by the way, that our mage has actually managed to summon a greater demon to fight for us, so that's pretty awesomely badass, and pretty much necessary against these vicious enemies. I'm sure we're the good guys, you know, I mean, we're just summoning demons to do our bidding, but, you know, I mean, we're the good guys, trust us.
Can you summon demons, wizard?
Yes! I strike at you. I would summon a demon more ferocious than all in hell!
Some of the most unpleasant are the priests of Ramm. They're not really that hard most of the time, but they do have the ability to cast that lifesteal spell I mentioned before, so you want to kill them as quickly as possible. The guardians of Ramm that come with them are just meat shields, they're not really all that tough. Some of the enemies are cruel spellcasters called Mind Flayers. I don't know if it's theft to use this proprietary monster from the Dungeons & Dragons games, but it's yet another Souls game similarity, because Demon Souls and Bloodborne also had Illithid-adjacent creatures used without permission. The Super Famicom version, I noticed, did change the Mind Flayers into basic mages, which I did not like. All of the monsters have their toughest variants as a leader in the encounter. The Mind Flayer leader is called the Keeper of the Crystal. If you plan on using a psionic, you may want to spend some time grinding the Keeper until he drops his eponymous PK Crystal. It's a psionic-only amulet that grants -4 to AC and regenerates the user, making resting a snap. It can also be imported into Wizardry 7 for a class that otherwise can't really bring many useful weapons or armor. You may also run into hideous pit fiends, demonic creatures rising up from the bowels of hell, with high resistance to almost all spells, and they use devastating fire attacks. But if you whittle down his strength, probably with melee, you have a chance for him to drop the legendary Excalibur. Excalibur is without doubt the best weapon in the entire series, with massive damage and the ability to turn enemies into stone, instantly killing them. I've never actually gotten it to drop in Wizardry 6, but you may want to have some fun and actually try to grind it out, and see if you get lucky. Another devastating opponent is a mix of poison giants and spellcasting fairies called Twisted Sylphs. You can spend as much time as you want fighting all of these champions by pressing a button at the end of the area and starting everything all over again. After slaughtering all of the champions at the apex of the Temple of Darkness is the epic fight against Zorfidus, or rather the evil side of him when his soul was cloven in two 120 years ago. Splitting hairs here along with souls. He summons hellish demons to fight with him, so get ready for a tough fight. We do defeat him, but like Ravel Puzzlewell and Planescape Torment, it proves very difficult to fully and finally kill a sufficiently powerful mage. He at the very least slips away pathetically with a last cryptic taunt about what to do next. Ooh, I can't believe it. You killed me! I'm dead. I can't believe I'm really dead. Why? The Cosmic Forge? You killed me over the stinking pen? Ooh, I can't believe it. At least you could have killed me for a good reason, like you didn't like the way I dress or who I pray to. Just for that, I'm not going to tell. And without me, you'll never find it. It could be right in front of you, but you'd never know. You could even be within 3 steps of it and still you wouldn't find it. Ha 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 ha. You can search all you want to, and it just won't do you any good. And why? Because you can't push yourself past the limits of what you know to see the world that lies beyond. The world you see is an illusion, only a trick. a reflection of the operation of your own mind. Well, except that it's real, too. Except that it isn't. I mean, oh, well, skip it. But let me ask you this. You're searching for the Cosmic Forge, the Pen of Destiny, and it sounds like powerful magic. But what if it wasn't magic? What if it was... And suddenly the visage looks outward, as if it's looking across space, across the echoes of time, across the boundaries that limit the evolution of perception and human consciousness. And then he merely vanishes. I managed to guess what to do here, but there's no shame if you don't figure it out. All of the secret walls in Wizardry 6 are done through buttons that you press, which then opens up the secret door, except for this one, which behaves like a more standard illusory wall, where you just walk into it, and then we drop down to a new area. If you trusted the Queen and wore the Silver Cross, you have to fight one of the hardest battles in the series, not in the game, in the series. The Bane King and his daughter Rebecca are immune to all damage from standard weapons and spells, so you can't rely on all of the cool things that you've got over the past couple of hours. Back in the forest, you will have to find a cursed half-sunken sailing ship. Inside the ship, along with a bunch of undead, is a large cross of splintered wood. From the cross, you can find sharpened holy stakes of wood. These are the only melee weapons that can damage the Vampire King and his daughter. Holy water vials can also be given to your back row characters so they can cause a little damage too. The holy water is located in a secret cache of a dead monk behind a hidden wall in the forest. The Silver Cross still needs to be invoked at the start of the battle, or you won't even be able to damage them with the stakes and holy water. Also in the forest you can find a strange shiny rock. Hitting the rock with the miner's pick, which you picked up ages ago, will cause it to shatter. Equipping the Rocks of Reflection during the final onslaught will prevent the Bane King gazing and hypnotizing your party members. Dracula and Rebecca sling very powerful spells, so using Anti-Magic Shell and Silence are a must. Even then, it's an extremely tough slog of a fight that can easily wipe your party. Fortunately, all this can be avoided, and I almost always do that. By dropping the cross after talking to the Queen, there's no final battle. Please accept my apology for the poor accommodations in which you were placed earlier, but the temple was all booked up for the weekend. The fact of the matter is, I am tired. A long time ago I wished many things, all for myself, and all to make me the superior of those around me. And so I plotted and schemed and made plans and alliances, all to bring some great power into my grasp. But I was still afraid of death. How I feared that one day I would not be here, no longer able to touch this world, to move it and to be moved by it. And so it was that I was dealt a blow far greater than death itself. I took the pen of destiny and cast aside the laws of nature and of life. And as I wished to live forever as I had done in the past, it came to pass by the writ of the Cosmic Forge. As I did rule by the blood of others, using it to further my own gain, so I was transformed forevermore into the creature you see before you, doomed forever to prowl the night and feed my never-ending hungers, and all for what? I do not know. Although everything must eat to live, all that I touched withered and died, and soon all that I was did likewise. So I died anyway, even without death, and yet my corpse walked on, compelled by Bane of the Forge to forever renew, nay, only replenish myself. And what a curse it was! How can I begin to tell you of what it is like to merely survive, only endure and feel no warmth, feel no joy, only to go on and on and on? And yet we fear change, and thus fear the name of death. And as long as we fear death, we shall never be free to truly live. Strange words from one such as I, but my epitaph nonetheless. And the vampire takes a wooden stake from beneath his cloak, and without a change of expression plunges it deep into his own heart. The bane be ended, I embrace the night, and the vampire fades into mist. So that was a bit anticlimactic for him, but I think it actually works a lot better than some huge boss fight. Remember that we got the key to the Queen's chamber from him. He quote-unquote dropped it when he left us when we first met him. And maybe he didn't do that accidentally. He maybe wanted us to get into the Queen's chamber, wanted us to find the means to destroy him. And when we refused to do it, he had to do it himself. He was plotting his own demise. And he said that he was surviving without really living. He's probably been depressed for a really long time, so he ended his own suffering. Rebecca greets you cordially and explains what to do next. If you say I love you to Rebecca, she will give you one of the best artifacts in the game, the Diamond Ring. It regenerates health, grants -5 to AC, and can be taken all the way to Wizardry 8. Thus, the Queen, the Bane King, and his Dark Archwizard and the demonic daughter are all either dead or vanished, concluding a tale of greed, pride, and lust that ruined a kingdom and damned countless souls, all in the name of a mad lust for ultimate power over the cosmos. Unless you have a strong desire for a brutal boss fight to test your skills, there's really no reason to keep that cross. And I just think it works out from a storytelling perspective too. It's a little bit more traditionally tragic here than just having a standard fight. A few questions are left though. What exactly were the Bane King and Zorfidus doing for the past 120 years? Did they just wallow in their own melancholy? Or did they try and change their cursed condition somehow? What happened to their plan to rule over countless planes of existence and ascend to godhood? And who created the Cosmic Forge in the first place, and don't they want it back? With the Ring of Stars, we can now finally read the King's diary, if you remember you still have it, and think to use a ring on a book, which you may not. The password is mysterious. The Hand of Destiny. What does it mean to seize the Hand of Destiny? To seize it by yourself rather than let destiny unfold around you. It seemed to cause a lot of death and destruction for the people that tried, but that's ultimately what we're trying to do in the series. Kinda makes you wonder what's gonna happen to us at the end. Sci-fi blending seamlessly into high fantasy was a common trope in the early days of CRPGs, so it's only surprising to a more modern audience accustomed to tonal clarity.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Though again, I should mention that more science fiction elements were introduced into Bloodborne and even Elden Ring, adding a final linkage between the two series. Beyond the door is the cause of all this trouble, the Bane Pen. Now we have a choice to make. Seizing the pen for our own is obviously a mistake. We know the object, no matter how powerful, is useless outside of the Cosmic Circle, the celestial home of the Cosmic Lords. So we need the pen and access to the circle, somehow, wherever it is, which presumably isn't on our planet. So our final goal is basically unattainable, and always was, and is even in the title, the Bane of the Cosmic Forge. It's cursed without the Cosmic Circle, so we can't really use it, at least not yet. Destroying the last vestiges of the Cursed King and his wizard was really all we could accomplish here without becoming cursed ourselves. Expectations are subverted again if we try and take the pen away. A robot, you'll recognize him as Altheides if you've played the later games, teleports in, takes the pen before we can touch it, and teleports us away. But I'm not going to take the pen. We can find yet another illusory wall and meet her brother, Bella. Bella is part dragon, part humanoid, I think. He's a little bit more humanoid in Wizardry 8, and he has an interesting backstory. Also, if you kill Rebecca, Bella is furious and attacks you, so don't fight Bella either. He's also very difficult. And because this is the end of the game, there's not really a point. Perched upon his throne, a great black dragon sits sulkily pondering the deep mysteries of the universe, glancing at his crystal ball on occasions for some obscure reference. Well, he says, I think I know where they might be located, and we can make fuel from the dinosaur remains up in the forests. But it'll take about a year to make it with our vessel. I guess all that remains is whether you have the guts to make the trip. Me, personally, I don't like to fly too much, but with everyone dead, it sure will be dull around here. Do you want to chase a cosmic lord? Me too. Come on, let's get out of here. Ain't she a dandy? All aboard. No matter what path you choose, the party ends up chasing a cosmic lord in a spaceship, ready for more adventures in the depths of deep space. A very unpredictable ending, but I think it's delightfully so. The game then sends you back out into the Dark Forest where you can trade out all of the items you don't need anymore for some low-level armor that you can take to Wizardry 7, along with whatever superpowered weapon you want to bring for one character each. Don't make the mistake I did of leaving your characters with only high-level armor, which will all be taken away, leaving them naked in Wizardry 7. Even if you have the Muramasa blade, you don't want to be going into battle buck naked. So we end the game like we began, buying some leather armor from Queequeg, and getting ready for our later cosmic journey in a spaceship. Our quest was extremely challenging, very, very confusing, sometimes maddeningly so, but it's also the tightest adventure of all of the games. 7 and 8 both spread out the adventure a little bit wider, and it takes a lot longer to complete both of those games. This one you can complete, if you know what you're doing, in considerably less time, making it more of a game I'd like to go to if I don't have an epic amount of time to put into something, but just want a tighter, more cohesive adventure. Sometimes I feel with the weird skip ahead at the very end of the game that we missed some content in the middle between the mountains and the river Styx that we were supposed to go through to more gently lead us upward, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. The combat is excellent and addicting. You can get some incredible weapons and armor. You can import all of your characters to another game, so what you did in this game is going to matter for the next game. So it's highly recommended you play this game first before going into Wizardry 7. I've done reviews now of all 3 games in the Cosmic Forge Wizardry trilogy, and weirdly enough did them backwards. Wizardry 8, then 7, then 6. But I'm going to link these 7 and 8 videos in the description box so you can watch them there. Looking back on Wizardry 6, I'm really struck by how brilliant D.W. Bradley really was in advancing the game, from its humble yet powerful origins of its first 5 games, into something completely new. He did what every game maker that makes a sequel dreams of doing. He kept the series generally in line with what came before, but advanced it to make it much more engaging and interesting. It's really the gold standard for how to make a sequel to a game that's not just repetitious of what's gone before, and without making it drastically different so it feels like you're playing a completely different series, again, like Wizardry 4. Is it confusing? Yes. Can it be frustrating at times in its difficulty? Of course. But it's still one of the most important RPG games ever made. And unlike the first 5 games in the series, I think this one holds up a lot better than the previous games. This is still fun, at least for me, an old fogey, to play over 3 decades after it came out. And finishing it up, I'm just struck with how important and powerful this game is, and it makes me think about the game's future. Recently, a Wizardry announcement was made that felt like a bolt from the blue. The first Wizardry game, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, is not only getting an official digital release for the first time, but it's being completely remade. New graphics, music, animated enemies, the whole works. Just think of what this could mean for the Cosmic Forge trilogy. Especially for the first 2 games, we could have fully narrated dialogue, something I've tried to sample for you here. Along with better sound effects, removing outdated inventory management. Heck, they could even make the forest look like an actual forest. And in fact, recently, Wizardry 6, 7, and 8 is going to be re-released, but just in Japan. Because the information is in Japanese, though, I can't really figure out exactly what's going on. But the Western remake of Proving Grounds the Mad Overlord is just giving me so much hope that one of the best RPGs ever made could actually be remade for a modern audience and entice new people to play it. Not that it needs that for you to play it, you should play it no matter how it looks, but it would just be nice to have all of those things, those little extras like fully voiced dialogue and everything, actually present in the game. I think that would really enhance the experience. GOG, and to a lesser extent Steam, are doing a great job preserving old games for the future. But the absolute best of the best, the cream of the crop like Wizardry 6, deserves something better. In recent years, games like The Bard's Tale, another seminal RPG trilogy from the time, have been totally remade, paving the way for remaking the classics of the RPG genre. There probably are some issues related to licensing and who actually owns Wizardry 6, which is probably complicated, but still, if we say that we like the game enough and show people that we want it, that could only help us get the remaster that we want, or maybe even a full remake. But whatever happens to the Wizardry series in the future, I hope I've convinced you to play Bane of the Cosmic Forge. It's such an important special game to me that I want to spread it around to as many gamers as possible. There are multiple ways to play it on PC, with Steam and GOG both having versions that go for like a couple of bucks when they're on sale. I've also sprinkled in the Super Famicom version here and there for variety. And to let you know that a fully playable English patched version is available, if you look for it, if you prefer the 16-bit console aesthetic better. The console version has excellent graphics, a full soundtrack, and even fixes the various bugs I talked about. The only drawback is that you obviously can't import your file to Wizardry 7, so it may be better to play the DOS version if you plan on doing that. Oddly, there also seems to be a very obscure Sega Saturn version, or at least only in Japan, of Wizardry 6 and 7. It looks pretty much like the Wizardry 7 version for 6, but unfortunately, because there's no English language translation to this, I was unable to play it very much. It would be nice if this game got some sort of English language translation, but those patches are really hard to make, and usually only games that are a little bit less obscure than Bane of the Cosmic Forge are going to get it, and especially something less obscure than the Sega Saturn has now become. So I don't really know much about it, but if anyone does, if they can speak Japanese and know anything, please tell me. Bug fixes for the game that I mentioned, along with the auto map, will be linked in the description, along with a link to a channel by the YouTuber D-Forte. If you're into Wizardry, I highly recommend his channel as he plays Wizardry 6, 7, and 8 regularly. D-Forte has created an amazing mod, Wizardry 6 Remastered. It's a recreation of the entire game in the more advanced Wizardry 7 engine. He's also added a ton of new weapons and spells. If you're experienced already with Wizardry 6 and want a new challenge, I highly recommend the mod for anyone wanting to expand and perfect the Wizardry 6 experience. If we never get an official remake, this may be the best way to play the game in a remastered format. But that's going to be all for me for today. Please tell me what you think of the game, if you've played it before, and if you haven't, if I persuaded you to try it out. Also, tell me what you think about a new version of Wizardry 6 being released in the style of the new Bard's Tale trilogy. Maybe it's a pipe dream, but we can always wish, right? Anyway, Bane of the Cosmic Forge is a magnificent experience that deserves to be played by each new generation of gamers who want to discover some of the origins of modern RPGs. Seize the hand of destiny and play Bane of the Cosmic Forge today. But whatever you're out there doing, I'll see you out there in the stars.